I'll wait for your direction.
Apparently, I don't know how to do it. Oh, it says it's recording. It just doesn't show up. So
Okay.
Go ahead. My apologies.
Oh, no, that's fine. It's 9:35. We'll go ahead and call to order. And we'll begin with introductions of the people. How about around the table, and then crossing through the seats out there, and then online. So I'm Ann Kish, Commission Chair.
Superintendent Elsie Aronson, good morning.
Personal Commissioner.
Erin LaFrancois, Commissioner.
Henning Arledge, Commissioner.
Jenny Stapp, State Librarian. Melissa Williams, State Library.
Evan Hammer, State Library.
Nanette Gilbertson with the Montana Library Association.
Tracy Cook, State Library. Carol Organ, the State Library.
Nate Wool, State Library.
Carolyn Saltis, State Library.
William Kessler, State Library.
Marilyn Bennett, State Library.
Jessica Edwards, State Library.
And then our online participants.
Jamie Doggett, Commission.
Oh, sorry.
Ken Wall, Commission from Missoula.
Evan can handle it.
Amy Marchwick, the State Library.
Is that all that we have online? Just
No, Linda Vance, Senior Ecologist, Montana Natural Heritage.
Hi. Anybody else online? Okay, I see some people I don't know. I think that it's time for some new staff introductions.
Do I have all of these?
Yes.
Okay, let's start with William Kessler. William comes to us from Bozeman, although he's been working for the University of Florida there. His background in medical geography, but is here to help us with primarily with our NRCS contract, Natural Resource Conservation Service, where we have a lot of work to get done and not enough people to do it. So that's why we brought him on board. He's very excited about the idea of data set development and data set distribution, learning more about kind of the techniques we use here for that. He will be working directly for Troy on that project. We have two other GIS, William's a GIS technician. We have two other GIS technicians I want to introduce, both Caroline Saltis and Nate Wold are working for Aaron Fashaway. Caroline comes originally from Virginia, but has been in Montana for more than 4 years. Has worked for MBA Information Systems, the University of Montana, and was a climbing instructor at the Freestone Climbing in Missoula.
Wow.
Nate is originally from Kansas, has been in Montana for 5 years, earned his master's in geography from the University of Montana, and has worked in Glacier on the citizen science program. So both Nate and Caroline are will report to Aaron Fashaway, or have been reporting to Aaron Fashaway. They're kind of in the user services group, general GIS coordination support, but also available to Troy and Michael, the land and water information leads, to help support our support of the MSDI, the spatial data infrastructure layers. And what I've heard already from Aaron is, even though they started at different times over the last month. William's most recent on the 3rd. I believe Caroline came to us 13th of January. Is that right? Somewhere in there. Was it 7th? Okay. And Nate was 21st. They have already been doing great work and helping us a lot. So thank you to the three of you. I also want to introduce Marilyn Bennett. Marilyn Bennett is our new outreach and digital resources librarian. You may recall this is the position that when Jessica moved to the data coordinator position, left this position open. So Marilyn has very large shoes to fill, but I feel very confident that she will fill that role well. This includes overall collection management for the agency, the collection development policy, things like our databases, research resources, as well as supervision of the Talking Book Library program and staff. So Marilyn comes to us from the Flathead. She's been with Imagineif since 2011, and she got her master's in library science from the University of Washington in 2018. So I think that's all I have.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Yeah,
Huskies.
thank you. Thank you.
And I have one more staffing update. We also hired a temporary staff person named Jamie Faselt, who is temporarily helping to support Jennifer Burnell with the Montana Memory Project. We had some vacancy savings this year as it took time to fill some of these positions. And so we're using some of that to give her some added support in building exhibits using Montana Memory Project content. And Jamie's actually been in Butte this week coordinating with the Butte America podcast, The Richest Hill. If anybody of you listen to that, they're working to coordinate content that we have in the Montana Memory Project with the development of that podcast.
Very cool.
All right. We'll move to the consent agenda, and so there's two things on there, but so we only are going to need one action. I'm trying to open the Montana Shared Catalog. So the first one is the approval of minutes. Does anybody?
So
Well,
moved.
I guess we need to. I guess we'll look at both of them, and then we'll take Jamie's so moved if she's still ready to offer that. I can't open the Montana Shared Catalog document right now for some reason, but I believe there were two applications. One of them was Great Falls and one of them was Toole County. Yeah. So those are exciting.
Mhm.
4 locations.
Oh, they're yes, they each have 2 locations. So it's 4 locations total. Huh. All right. So do we have any public comment regarding either of those, either the minutes or the new library applications? Do either of you, Tracy or Kara, want to say anything about the Montana Shared Catalog applications?
We're absolutely thrilled
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
to receive these applications. Amy is also online.
Oh,
So,
Amy, did you have anything to add?
Just to echo what Kara said, that we're thrilled.
$25,000 seems very modest. Is it adequate?
I'll defer to Amy on that question because she's leading the onboarding.
So $25,000 is about what it cost to migrate Lewis and Clark last year through Cersei Dynex. Cersei Dynex came back with a much higher quote for Great Falls Public, and so we will be migrating them internally. So the 25,000 should be more than adequate. Yeah.
Okay.
They're already a Cersei Dynex customer on a similar
Nice.
application. So we're not having to deal with a change in vendor
Should
and
be more
system.
straightforward.
It should be more straightforward.
Yes.
And I did tap wood.
Yes. and Toole County will be retrospectively cataloging, so there won't be as data migration, it'll be training, and then they'll be cataloging everything and then going live. So that's always much cheaper.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, is there a motion, if there's no further public comment, a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes.
Can you say, Jenny, how many catalogs does this bring, or how many libraries does this bring?
It'll be,
Better than I can.
yeah, in terms of individual libraries in the system, will be at 191 or 92, I think. In terms of different institutions, will be, are we at 104? Will this bring us to 114, Kara?
In terms of billing, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll move to the state librarian's report.
Great. Number of things to touch upon. Since we met in December, the education subcommittee looking at House Bill 633 had another meeting. It again went very well. The agenda for the state library was largely focused on the two documents you saw at your October meeting, where we reviewed a new proposed budget as well as some potential funding sources to fund that budget. You'll recall that the total budget that we proposed was around $14 million, and that funding sources included things like an internal service fund that would allocate certain costs across agencies based on agency use, looking at things like professional licensure fees, an increase to the Montana Land Information Act account, implementing an RTN network, which could be self-sustaining. That's a real-time network, which could be a self-sustaining model, using some state next generation 911 funds to help support the necessary addressing and transportation data necessary to support the next generation 911 system. And of course, that kinds of data also has wide applicability across other kinds of applications. Continued really good positive discussion with members of the subcommittee. What Chair Beatty suggested was that we take a deeper dive into the budget and the funding possibilities at their March meeting. That meeting, we don't have the exact date, but it'll either be March 18th or 19th, or the 2 days that committee is scheduled to meet. Since that time, we've had a follow-up meeting with 2 members of that committee who are serving as sort of a subcommittee, looking at some of the use metrics and how specific agencies and other kinds of users use our data to better inform the process that they're going through. We have a follow-up meeting with that group next week, looking at how agencies use our data and again, taking a deeper dive into what these funding options might look like. We had a good meeting with legislative staff last week to help prepare for that meeting. At this point in time, they've asked us to start actually putting some details to what is essentially about $8 million in new monies. They want to know the number of FTE, amount of personal services, operations, grant funds, and other budget categories. So we've developed that information. We'll share that with you at your April commission meeting. The process that we're going through is new and different from other kinds of processes that we've gone through at this point in the budget planning process. For those of you who've been with the commission in previous executive planning processes, you know that we work with staff to talk about what our agency budget priorities for new proposals might look like, and prioritize and rank those recommendations, and then typically bring them to the commission in April of the years when we're going through that executive planning process. Given the work that's going into House Bill 633, really those priorities will be driving the agency's executive planning processes, and we feel like we would be doing ourselves a disservice to propose anything outside of what we're already working to support through this process. At the December meeting of the subcommittee, Chair Beatty said that they would be looking at sort of a twofold path to try to bring forward the recommendations of the committee. The first would be to try to get any possible budget recommendations into the governor's budget, and then if necessary, carry any committee legislation to enact any laws or budget requests that they would ultimately recommend coming out of this process. And so with that guidance, it makes sense for us to ensure that what we've proposed to the legislative committee is in line with what we share with the governor's office during our executive planning process. We're just starting to get the timeline for what that process will look like, but typically we build that budget around the June time period.
So the EPP will be later.
It's in line with what it's been in the past. It's usually in this time frame where we're working with staff to identify our budget priorities. We bring them to the commission in April and then actually go through the process of discussing them with the governor's budget office over the course of the summer.
So at this point, are we coordinating with the governor's office, our work with the legislature?
They are aware of our work with the legislature, yes.
And, okay. Thank you.
You'll recall that Nancy Hall was at the October meeting when we reviewed those financial documents and the funding priority documents.
Great.
Any questions about that process? It's a little bit different for us as staff to kind of wrap our heads around what this process will look like as well. Just announced yesterday, we received word from the 3DEP program of the USGS that we've received another award to support the state LiDAR plan. Back in June, we had received word that was largely federal dollars, but between the 3DEP award and other federal contributions, a total project of award of about $2.7 million. Just yesterday that we received word that 3DEP is going to be contributing about $2.5 million, and then state partners that include a number of tribal entities, the Montana NRCS, the Glacier National Park, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are contributing about $900,000. So in total, the next award is about $3.4 million. So in the past 8 months now, we're looking at a little over $6.5 million awarded. And again, that's thanks to the great coordination work that Troy Blandford, the Water Information System Manager, and Aaron Fashaway are doing to coordinate work on the state LiDAR plan that you guys saw last summer. Is there a question there?
I'm just curious about, I assume that that we'll be flying areas that are of concern to those entities that the tribes and the park and things that NRCS has identified. And I assume that we're still pursuing a pattern where we're kind of doing it in pieces, and that our plan is eventually for there to be no blank places on the map. We're still working in that direction.
That's correct, right. Following the state LiDAR plan where they've identified priority areas for collection. I think at some point this summer, once we have that data, we'll invite Troy back to give you an update on where we fall within the state based on that ranking, and we're continuing to work with the work group that's identified and created that plan to identify what those priorities are.
When will those data, those flyovers be available to plebes like me to look at online?
What has been completed, what we've received is available now.
Great. How do you find that?
There's a story map. I believe it's in our materials, and you can certainly find it under our water information system that includes both information about where we have received LiDAR data from. And this does include not only what's been collected through 3DEP, what we've received, but also any other LiDAR that meets USGS specs that we've been able to retrieve from other sources and enter into the system. And I just add, for anybody unfamiliar, and a little bit to your question, your earlier question, 3DEP is 3D elevation program. More recently, they've also been using 3D Nation. It was originally conceived as, it was supposed to be an 8-year program to get nationwide coverage. I think they've blown past the 8-year, but their target, I believe, is 2022. And so our statewide target is also 2022.
So is elevation a theme for us? And is this LiDAR information available if you go right to that theme?
Yes.
Very cool. I just think staff should like get taken out for a beer.
Excellent.
This is excellent. So, okay, we can work on this. I just think that we went from kind of viewing this as a kind of a $60 million impossibility to we're making it real little bit by little bit, and I just think that's It shows such resourcefulness and courage to kind of pursue that. I just think it's wonderful.
Oh,
Full marks.
I would point to Evan, who last spring said, let's just do this. Let's just put an idea out there and see if they'll fund it.
And I'd point to Troy and the elevation working group that put a plan in place, right? There was a lot of question about putting a plan together when we don't have any money
Resources,
in this. But there are people with money that want to get this done, and they just need somebody coordinated. And Troy's done a great job.
Well, they it's again sort of the secondary kudo that they see the state library as a trusted partner who can make stone soup.
Yeah. And the other piece, another big kind of jumpstart for us was through NISJIC. They had a 3D Nation pilot project that Aaron was involved with that also helped push to make the plan happen. So don't want to.
It's terrific. Thank you.
Little by little.
Thank you.
Little by little, absolutely. We also received word this month about our Library Services Technology Act Fiscal Year 20 award. That award was $1.2 million. That's up from about $1.08 million, or about a 10% increase. So we're very, very excited about that increase. It's a step towards that larger goal of the dollar per capita initiative that the chief officers of state library agencies is pushing for. It's a step in the right direction in fully funding the base amount of funding that all states are supposed to receive under the reauthorized Museum and Library Services Act. So we're very pleased that this is a positive step in the right direction. It's the first substantial increase in LSTA funds that we've received in well over a decade. And I think that's something important to be marked. We are working with staff to identify what staff think the priorities should be for how we would spend that increase. And then we'll have a discussion with the Network Advisory Council at their March meeting, and then follow-up meetings throughout the spring, so that when we're prepared to bring a budget to the commission in the summer, you'll know what those kinds of priorities are.
That's great. Congratulations.
It's a like I said, it's a step in the right direction.
Although you have seen the president's budget, right?
Yep,
To
absolutely.
get goals for the elimination.
Exactly.
Of IMLS,
I was texting with my friend Crosby Kemper this morning. He's the new director of the Institute of Museum and Library Services, who's been on the job for a week now, and the president proposed eliminating his budget in that week. So.
And him.
And him.
But we have weathered proposed elimination before.
Yeah. You know, I think the first time this happened about 4 years ago, it created great anxiety for all of us. And we don't want to be complacent. The problem with this cycle is that we risk becoming complacent in our advocacy. A few more updates for you. The Land Information Act grant application period is currently open. Those grant applications are due February 18th because of the holiday weekend. I just got a quick update from staff this morning. We believe there's about 8 or 9 serious applications there. And again, it's about $250,000 that's budgeted for in the land information plan for next year. And these grants would be awarded this spring and go into effect July 1 with the start of the new year. So we'll have those grant applications for you as action item no later than your June meeting. We may end up having to call a special meeting to take action to approve those, to allow for enough time for those grant applications to be awarded before the start of the fiscal year. And then I did want to ask Amy and Kara to share another follow-up update with you about the discussion we had at your December meeting about the work that's ongoing with the partners group to come to some better arrangements in how they share resources. So Kara, turn to you unless you'd rather have Amy take the lead.
Well, most recent plan in development is that we've actually been working with Tracy, who about whether to bring in an external facilitator to help us work through some issues and partners. In part so that shared catalog slot could have a seat at the table in that discussion, because we have been called upon by that group to have an opinion on this issue. The issue is such that it's really kind of an equity issue, and we can see merit in both arguments. So that comes across as maybe a little bit wishy-washy on our part, but we think that we have some more substantive points to make at an in-person meeting, so it would be useful for our staff to be able to participate in that meeting rather than to be neutral. And so to look into bringing in a facilitator, Tracy has had a conversation with
Could you speak up a little bit so we can make sure and hear you?
Stand up and
Thank you.
So I had a conversation with Ned Cooney, and this was based on me going out and talking to some of the partner libraries who kind of indicated that they really felt like they could not on their own come to consensus. And so that's when I came back to Amy and Kara and Jenny and said, I think it's time for the state library perhaps to recommend a course of action for the group. And so when I met with Ned, I kind of gave him that background, and then I said, our desired outcome is for the group to kind of come together, to compromise, and to try a solution to see if they can solve the problem so services to patrons are not interrupted, and also to lay the foundation for the group to be able to work through these conflicts in the future. And so Ned and I had kind of a good conversation about how to organize that meeting in such a way that we would be able to hopefully bring the groups together. I think the librarians would actually feel a huge amount of relief to have the state library come in and encourage them to compromise and to work together towards a solution.
I think it's terrific. I mean, it's not what these tensions have been growing for a decade and a half. So it's probably time for a periodic maintenance here. What's new, of course, is the fair use resolution, which basically says that every Montanan, our goal is that every Montana has sufficient library resources. And I feel strongly, as I know you do, that the shared catalog plays an important part in that, a central part in that. And I would hope whatever this task force or meeting of the minds, this process comes up with, is within that context, so that when the results, when your recommendations come to the commission, or if they don't rise to coming to the commission, I hope that they are pursuant those goals of giving every Montanan sufficient library resources regardless. I mean, I think that, and then I would expect that will not come without a cost. And I would celebrate the extra LSTA money, because maybe that's the kind of thing, for me, speaking just for myself as a commissioner, that would be a very, very high priority for spending the extra federal, not extra, but the additional federal money that we're anticipating this next round. This seems like an opportunity to take the next step for the shared catalog to become more of a backbone for every Montana library.
I didn't hear everything. Did you say that you were working with Ned Cooney as an external facilitator for a special meeting?
Yes.
Oh, okay, and that's great. Every time he's been an external facilitator with me, it's gone very well.
Yeah, he grasped the problem really, really quickly, and the inequity when I was talking to him, and he could understand. It was interesting. He immediately could understand both the arguments of those libraries who have the luxury of enough space and budget to be able to provide multiple copies versus those libraries who may not have the space and budget and are watching their sole copy fly out the door, which is really at the root of the problem. And so I was very reassured, and he felt like what we were asking for was realistic, because he said you can sometimes want to like bring everyone to consensus and basically solve all the world's problems. And we weren't really asking for that. We're just asking to find a solution for this one problem and hopefully give the group a framework so that they can resolve these conflicts when they come up, especially as the group grows, because that's fundamentally what is occurring here. Amy, if you want to add anything?
So just, yeah, to echo all of what Kara and Tracy said, and the MSC, the sysadmins have been working on the system configuration side to prepare options that we can present during that meeting. So that the solution that we come up with is actually technologically feasible as well.
Any other questions? Just watched Jessica step out.
Oh, she.
So while I'm waiting for her to come back, I'll ask if there's any questions in any of the other materials that were shared with regard to the State Library report. We wanted her to do a demonstration of the Tableau system, and if there's any questions you have about the Tableau reader that Marla's emailed to you.
I had a question about a previous point. You said the dates, March 16 and 18?
March 18 and 19.
March 18
for
and 19?
the next meetings of the Education Subcommittee.
That's the Education Subcommittee.
Yes.
Okay. Is that helpful for us to attend?
If possible, yeah. I think continued attendance from a commissioner would be great.
Okay.
I'll be out of the country then.
Okay.
I will be in America.
Someone has to.
Here, Anne, give me one of these. There we go. That's a good one.
I'm curious with this Tableau page, where the word cloud comes from.
Jessica,
Jessica, you get, this is terrific, but I'm just slightly confused. Where is the word cloud drawn from for each page?
So, did anybody have a chance to actually use Tableau Reader to look at anything?
No.
No. Unfortunately, we installed it on the wrong machine, so it's in the bidder root instead of the group.
Oh.
But if there's interest later, we can install it and look at it. And I really encourage the commission to, if you have a chance, to install Reader and play around with it, because there's more information in there, like pop-ups, and you can generate kind of a few more views than what you see on the printouts. So for the word cloud, let me look at it really quick.
Do you want to use this one?
Yeah. So the word cloud actually came from me. I went through the different projects and the milestones that staff had set up, and I kind of categorized them. So for like Amelia's, it's lifelong learning, Aaron Fashawaite's and Troy's are GIS. So that's kind of like it's more of a test. And we can refine that. We can definitely change that. And what's really interesting is when you're in Tableau, if you click on that word cloud, it sorts it all for you. So you'll only see Montana Shared Catalog projects up there once you click on that, or only GIS projects. So that's something that's really fun. And so we want to kind of refine that a little bit. And if there's other things you want to see, like elements of a project, so like performance management, if you want to see any project that happens to have a lot of performance management aspects, even though we might just have one, we could create a word cloud with words like that as well. So we can kind of extract that information from what staff has identified as their projects and milestones.
Is Tableau Reader linked off of the State Library page someplace?
It is not, no. We can link to it.
Is it a freebie?
Mm-hmm. So we have, I use Tableau Desktop, that's what we pay for, but Reader's just like the free platform. So if you have the workbook and you have Reader, you can open it. You can't edit it, but you can see everything and interact with it a little bit.
I wonder if that could be put someplace somewhat obvious.
Well, there is also a Tableau public site that you could load this onto, right? That doesn't require any reader.
Right. So Tableau Public, yes, we could load it there as well. We're also working with ITSC to get Tableau Server, which would allow us to create a little bit easier. That would we can get it a little bit too. And information don't public quite like we have are and they're embed that either in SharePoint or do a password protect, so that way we own it. We're still working with that setup. But I think we could load this onto Tableau for now, if that were easier for people. Test it out and play around with it a little bit and see how it works. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what other information you want to see on here. This is what we've gathered from staff. So there might be stuff that we're not gathering yet that you want to see. Hours per project or estimated costs. And we don't actually have that information yet because all this stuff is ongoing, but maybe we want to ask staff to start tracking that so that we can include this for future views. So if once you get a chance to look at it a little bit more in depth, if there are things that you do want to see more of, please let us know because we really want to work to make this really functional for everybody.
But it just seems like it seems terrific. Wowzers.
And so if you do have a chance to go in here, so this first page, I don't think. Here we go. So these are the projects. When it's interactive, if you were to click on, say, this bar that for LiDAR, Troy's project, it would take you down to the milestones for that, the breakdown of it. And so it would show all the milestones that the lead for that project has identified and the length of time that they've kind of, an estimate of time that they've allowed for each milestone. And these are all color coded. So completed, on schedule, delayed, or not started.
Is there something that talks about which color means what?
Right up here to the right.
Oh, okay. Okay, it links to that.
Yeah, and so this is the same thing where if you click on one of these, it'll show you only, so if I click on the 71 for on schedule, it's going to pull out only the on schedule one. So you can kind of see like what's delayed, what hasn't been started yet.
When you're actually live with it, not just screenshots.
Right. And there are notes as well. So if you were hovering over anything, it would show you the notes. So for some of the not started ones, leads have entered notes on why it's not started, what they're waiting on, what we still need to get. And I'm going to work to standardize the language because this is coming from a bunch of different people. So I'd like for like milestones to all be in the same tense. And some of the stuff to be a little bit more standardized.
So if we had our own server, we could do this online someplace obvious in this website, state library website, and anyone on the planet could look to see what we were up to and how we were doing.
Yeah.
That would kind of meet that goal of transparency that we've been sort of chasing for half a dozen years.
Exactly. So like Jessica said, we've put in the request with ITST to get the server stood up. I don't know how long that process would take, so I don't know if we'll be able to have that by April, but hopefully in the very near future we'll have that live version. Marlis did send out a link to the reader, so we can send that out again too if you're interested in looking at something more interactive in the meantime.
That'd be lovely.
But that's the goal. And like Jessica said, you know, our hope is to get more standardized in the data development, in the data collection. You know, sadly right now the state's HR and accounting systems aren't linked, but you know, were we to be able to find a way to figure that out, it would be easier for us to track hours and budgets to all of this. So those are the longer term goals.
What's your read on the utility of this for staff?
I think it's a much more useful, not only product, but process. You know, we're actually asking staff to go in ahead of every commission meeting and think about the progress that they're making on these work objectives. And then we're also working on a process where as staff think about new projects that they want to implement, we have a tool that we can come back to and say, is that a priority over these other priorities? We're already maxed in the allocation of the resources we have. You know, how can we take on something new? Or is there something here that we need to let go of because something else is a priority? Like Jessica said, there's a way that we can dig into deeper and deeper views as we continue to implement this process. And staff are already starting to identify and track what the objectives will be for the next fiscal year. So this can become a more iterative process.
That's terrific. It's great. Kenning, you must use this at MSU.
We do. It is great. Tableau is a wonderful software. Yeah, and in the meantime, if you don't want to require people to download the reader, then Tableau Public is a nice option.
Okay, good.
It's just a website, like it would be if you stood up the server here.
Okay. I'm just really grateful to have Jessica to help us. You know, she's given us that lift that we needed to have someone dedicated to thinking about this.
My sense was not a piece of cake to put up.
No, and there's still so many things that I think can be refined and fixed. A lot of it's been trial and error, but it's been really interesting and really fun. So I've enjoyed doing it. And there's a lot of things that even as I look at it now, I kind of want to go in and tweak and fix a little bit. So yeah, it's really fun. And what's really nice about it is it connects to OneDrive. So it connects to something that staff can all access. So when I put out a reminder to them, they can all just go in and change it. And then I just have to go in and refresh the data, and then it just pulls in everything new, and it's good to go. So that's a really nice kind of somewhat seamless feature. So yeah.
Well, I think when this does go public, we should make maybe it could be a subject of one of your Friday talks or something, but we could really promote this heavily to the library community at least, and perhaps to our partners, and with kind of an emphasis on this is another step towards more perfect transparency.
Yep. Transparency, show the implementation of data-driven planning, the applicability for analysis.
And I can't help but think it would also be a useful marketing tool.
Yeah. Well, and so we recognize that this tool has one function, but there still is a need to tell our story in other ways, which is why we shared with you the LSTA 19 infographic report that was pulled together to show some of the overall impact of how we spent the LSTA 19 funds. So I think the kinds of ongoing Tableau reporting coupled with more emphasis on how we tell the appropriate stories, whether it's through those kinds of documents or story maps or other kinds of tools, I think will continue to improve our overall reporting and transparency processes.
What tool did you use for the LSTA report?
That was Visme. It's an online infographic maker.
Oh, okay.
Visme.
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 Well, it's again very effective.
Yeah.
This is Ken. I've got a question. Is there a possibility in the future, without a lot of extra work on Aaron's part, to do some pilots on this to implement or to kind of integrate it with the progress reports on the Montana Land Information Act grant programs or grant activities themselves?
So I think for that, Aaron's been using ArcGIS dashboard, Esri dashboards, and we actually just got licenses for Insights. That works really well with dashboards. So I think we are going to use the two kind of side by side. Tableau is going to work really well for some things, and Insights and dashboard are going to work really well for other things. So Erin's not here to ask her, but I think she's probably still leaning towards using operations dashboard and implementing Insights with that. And we just got that this week, so that's really exciting. And we both have a license, so we're going to be testing that out and seeing how that works with MLI reporting and some other reporting that we want to do. That's a little bit more geospatial based rather than just data based.
Okay, great. Thank you.
When I was looking at the LSTA report, the second page, I was struck by approximately 6,000 items circulated by the shared catalog. And 6 million, pardon me.
I was going to say
6 million. I'm decimally handicapped. And approximately 1 million by Montana Library to Go. I was surprised by the large proportion of materials that were circulated by Montana Library to Go, knowing how it struggles with having enough content. And I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think that it means something that the commission probably should look at. And after getting some guidance from the shared catalog folks as well as the NAC. But that is a really large portion of electronic materials being circulated. I mean, that almost sounds like it's in the same sort of trend as the materials that used to be circulated by paper by the state library versus the materials that are circulated now. So that is pretty interesting. It makes me feel like we're not giving enough resources to Montana Library Go.
I think that it's unquestionably so. And I don't think we're in a position to report now, but we are in the middle of a pilot with the Digital Public Library of America and had allocated $20,000 for a content budget to test what that application might look like. And this is the first month where members from Montana Library to Go's Collection Development Committee are actually procuring content through DPLA. It's certainly not sort of the silver bullet problem. There's the need for more resources, but one of the things that the DPLA brings to the table that we don't currently have is significantly more access to public domain and open resource content. And so part of the testing is evaluating what that kind of access to that kind of content does for patron access, effect on the holds queues in Montana Library to Go, and so forth. I think it's just one piece of the larger puzzle.
I'm sure that's true. Well, it's very helpful having methods of display that take and make obvious some of these kinds of things. This is great.
Any other questions or comments, feedback regarding the state library?
Work, Jessica.
Yes.
Great work.
Okay, we will move on to the second quarter financial report, and this is an action item, so we'll hear Melissa present the report and then take public comment, and then action will follow.
Okay, great. So you can see up on the screen here is the second quarter financial report. We met with the Finance Committee last week to go over this document. And so we are, as of this report, halfway through the year. And we have expended 43% of our total budget. So again, we're right on schedule. So during the second quarter, we made several large payments. The first is our annual federation payment that we make with our poll tax revenue. And that money goes out to each of the libraries in the state. And then we also made our state aid payment, which is a statutory payment that we make with our general fund dollars, which also goes out to each of the libraries throughout the state. And then the other big item that happened during the quarter was the extension and addition to our NRCS agreement, which is a federal grant that we have to the $560,000. So we've gone through the process of getting that appropriation added through the BCD process with the budget office. And then I did want to just add that next week I have our kickoff meeting for budget work. So we start right now helping the budget office get everything loaded into the IWAR system for EPP, and then through the fall we'll finalize it. So it's quite a long process, and the legwork starts now. And pretty soon we'll be at year end, so things will get super busy. On this second page of the report, I don't want to go into too much of this, but I just wanted to point out on the second page that this chart is a breakdown. So it represents the new org structure. So this is a little bit different than the one I presented last quarter, but it just shows a breakdown of what our new work groups look like. And so this is a reflection of the new org structure that we adopted at the beginning of this fiscal year. So it's really helpful way to break down our budget into meaningful bite-sized pieces and then be able to track it in that way. So I won't go into too much detail about this because we talk about this at the finance committee, but I wanted you to be able to see that you can see this information on the report.
Does anybody have any questions about the second quarter financial report?
You know, with the addition of having a finance committee, it might be useful to have the finance committee basically make a report to the commission that would then be part and parcel of this. That would give, since obviously money is one of the more important things in our purview as a commission, that would give us a little bit better look at it. At this point, there is kind of no direct feedback from the commission members of the finance committee to the commission. And it seems to me that that's one of the primary advantages of having the finance committee. I guess I would recommend in the future that we consider at least having them report and then having the finance report being part of that.
As a member of the finance committee, I feel like Melissa solicits our feedback, explains questions that we have, and then collates the information more clearly than any commissioner would necessarily be capable of doing, because she is, because that's her job.
And I'm not finding anything lacking in what's being presented here.
Right.
I want more.
And so I would say that we did, you know, for example, when we looked at the Heritage program, you did call on the subcommittee to sort of verify. I mean, not verify, but to sort of add comments and talk a little bit about what the discussion had been there. So I felt like you did that at a really appropriate time. I don't know, just Henning, maybe you can weigh in, and Jamie, maybe you could weigh in on what the commissioners on the subcommittee would be able to add independently of what Melissa's reporting.
So Melissa's report's like at the 5,000 foot level.
Yeah.
What the commissioners could help me with is the 30,000 foot level, saying, you know, when we went into the, you know, we had questions about the effect of this delayed payment from the feds, or we had questions about year-to-date kind of expenditures between 19 and 20, or those kinds of things, and just an additional channel. Again, this is no way meant to, I mean, this is lovely, but it's just different. It's a different kind of information to the, it provides the commissioners who are on the finance committee to give a 2-minute sort of summary, or longer if needed, of the finance part of things, and makes me feel even more assured that we're doing the right thing, or we should be scared as heck.
This is Jamie, and I'm going to sign in with the same comments that Ann gave. I'm on the finance committee. We usually have not overly long meetings, but we cover the information, and I really like the report that Melissa gives the full board. There's nothing I could add that would be any more clear than what she has done.
I do think there are times when that would come into play, when what you're saying would be really appropriate. If there were something that I had a question about, then I would assume that that other people might have the same question, and I would feel free to jump in on that, or even for Melissa to call on the commissioners to reiterate what our questions were, especially if we all had the same question. I just don't know that it should be a regular agenda item. What do you think?
And my prejudice or my bias is from OCLC, where there was a personnel, there was a finance, there was a membership, and each of these committees would rely almost entirely on staff kinds of things, but it was a member of the board bringing finance information back to board members. And it basically, it gave prominence to that process, and it kept it, it always felt to me like the board member on the finance committee would be an expert and would bring just a little bit different perspective, would bring a board perspective to the report, which is different than a staff perspective. And I like the way that worked, because the whole commission didn't act, the whole board as a whole didn't act on every kind of area of concern and didn't trash through the whole thing. It was basically being farmed out to these committees and then brought back in summary. And the only time there would be a lot of time taken in a board meeting talking about something if there was a problem or if there was an opportunity of some sort for, let's say, acquisition of a company or a nonprofit. Or a merger of some sort, but generally speaking, it just sort of it dealt the commission more fully into the process, and like I say, gave a little bit different flavor to the information, which frankly I find useful. Not that this is not useful, because this is great, but it just like here, I listen to multiple news channels to hear the same news, and it's helpful sometimes.
So would the finance committee be amenable to adding this as an agenda item to the next meeting? What would be appropriate for the commission to report back to the commission?
Like, for instance, and you ask a question.
I'm struggling to know what that would be, so.
Well, how about I demonstrate when we talk about NAC stuff?
Okay. All right, thank you. Is there any public comment on the second quarter financial report?
I actually just had one question.
Go ahead.
On the second page under consulting and learning, just that there's 75% expended, is that a worry or?
No, so a lot of these broken out budgets are, the percent expended is varied. And so that's something that I look at very closely. And so consulting and learning is significantly more than 50% past the year, because that's the program we pay the Federation payments out of. And so that's a big chunk of money.
That's good to know.
Yes, and I and that also is the state aid payments that went out. So it's a big chunk of money that goes all at once, and so it will gradually we'll be fine by the end of the year.
Okay.
Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor? Oh, I can't make a motion.
I'll move that
This is Ken.
I'll move that we accept the second quarter financial report.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We're going to move on to talk about, just looking to see, is everybody good? Well, we don't need a break yet. Okay. We're going to talk about the draft public library standards, and Jenny and Tracy are going to take the lead on that.
Before I turn things over to Tracy, I just want to sort of lay the stage for what this process is and what it's going to look like. For most of this calendar year, the Commission and the State Library are the body responsible for creating the standards for public libraries, for public library services. And it's these standards that libraries have to certify that they meet in order to qualify for state aid. And the standards were last reviewed and updated in 2009 and 2010. So it's been about a decade since we've gone through that process. And in that time, there have been sort of a number of changes, both in the expectations for library services, as well as how we think about how we measure the impact and talk about the work of library services. And so those were a couple of the driving factors in thinking about a need to update the public library standards. We've talked a lot in the last 5 or 6 years about libraries turning outward, libraries being more of a community anchor where their focus needs to be externally on community needs rather than thinking about our services in terms of managing materials, circulating materials, conducting interlibrary loan and reference, and reporting our standards based on those kinds of services. So the goal is to have standards that really reflect that change in thinking of what public library service really is to a community. And also to think about how we can use our standards process to both evaluate and talk about the impact that libraries have in our communities and in our state. So with those motivating factors, we sat a task force late last summer of librarians. There's library representatives from each federation that represent all sizes of public libraries. Bruce has sat on that as a member of the commission. They've worked really hard over the last almost 6 months to put together an early draft of public library standards. And I want to reiterate that we are in the very, very early stages of now what becomes a very public process to continue to review and refine what these standards are. The standards will go through a public comment period over the next several months. Once the commission is comfortable with the standards, we will then move into an administrative rules process. The standards themselves exist in administrative rule, and that process also mandates a public process and a public comment period before the commission would take final action to adopt these public library standards. The standards have been publicly available now for a couple of months as we've been working with the task force to continue to come up with this first draft of what they might be, and we've accepted some public comment and accommodated some of those comments in the thinking of the task force that's brought us to the point of sharing this draft of the standards that's shared with you here today. And again, our hope is that from here we move into a public comment period, that it will involve discussion at each of the 6 spring federation meetings. The focus of our discussions at the conversations with the commission, at the Montana Library Association conference. We're also hoping for more tribal college library involvement in this process. So we're working to arrange some meetings of both the tribal college librarians as well as the local public libraries in those areas to talk about what the standards might mean for them. I want to give Chasey a chance to talk about how we view these standards as a library development tool as well. But I also want to emphasize that currently under public library standards, tribal college libraries, they don't have to certify that they meet them, and they're also not eligible for state aid. And that's an opportunity that we think is being missed right now. And so we sincerely hope in this process that when we come out on the other end, we'll have standards that tribal college libraries can meet in their service to their communities, and that as we look at the need to reauthorize state aid in 2023, that we do that with a mind of adding additional funds so that tribal college libraries too could receive state aid for certifying that they are providing these kinds of services to their community.
If that's something tribal colleges want.
Certainly, yeah. Tracy?
Yeah, so I sent you a lot of documents to review, but just to kind of explain some of the differences. As Jenny mentioned, the draft excellent and essential and excellent standards is the administrative rules of Montana. That's a legal document in essence, or will become one. as I was working with the task force members and listening to feedback from the librarians, it kind of became clear to me that it would be very, very useful to go into more detail about what some of the standards mean. I mean, some of them are fairly obvious, but others, the librarians in the task force said, you know, sometimes we feel like we are saying to the current public library standards, yes, we meet these standards, but we wonder, do you really? And so I created the survey tools to give librarians and you a sense of what the different standards mean and to help maybe provide clarity. And I certainly see the survey tool as more of the library development piece. That's kind of what we are aspiring to, particularly with the excellent public library standards. And that was the opportunity within that survey tool to really kind of talk about the purpose of the standards and what we hope is achieved when libraries meet those standards. So I would be curious today to just know from you if you have any comments, questions, or concerns about the standards themselves. And then the other piece that would be very useful to me is we go out and we talk to librarians. And I do want to hear from librarians about whether or not they feel these are kind of the exact right version of challenging them to go to the next level, but not pushing so hard they're unattainable. I'd really like to know the answer to that. But I also just kind of want to get a sense from you what questions you might have for the librarians as we go out and talk to them. We presented to you the questions the task force had. They mentioned these as we were talking through the different standards. We probably will not be able to address all of those. So in particular, if there are questions you saw on that list that you're like, we please make sure that we ask this question. That would be very useful for me to know as well when we're facilitating these different discussions. So at this point, I would just like to know if you have any questions or comments for me on any of the standards or the documents you received.
This is Jamie, and I have a question or a comment, I guess. Tracy, have you talked with the librarians about working with their county commissioners on these library standards for them locally? And I think that my theory is that if the commissioners see how honest, steadfast, and true librarians are and what they're looking for in their community, if they're a participant, they might be better suited or better prepared to be supportive. And also, if they're included in the process of the standards, they realize what the needs and the requirements is not the right word, but the standards that their library should have that they are funding. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And that particular topic actually came up in I think a more reactive way than a proactive way, which is what you are describing, in that
Yes.
as librarians were reviewing these public standards, they happened to mention that sometimes in order to avoid a pretty serious budget cut to the library, they would bring these standards forth as being why they needed the funding that they needed. What I kind of like about your approach is it is being proactive and involving the county commissioners as part of that process. And that's something, you know, Jenny and I could approach Mako and the Montana League of Cities and Towns to talk about.
I know that they're not always excited to have, you know, one more thing on their plate, but especially in the smaller counties, I would have appreciated that when I was a commissioner to have the library come in and not just beg for money, but say, these are the statewide steps that we're working towards making our library the best that we can.
Great suggestion.
Question, Tracy. So in the excellent standards draft under personnel, salaries, and benefits certification directors, number 3 says directors of any size library have a college degree or equivalent experience. It seems like a really, really minimal standard, and I wonder how that will look from the outside.
So we had a lot of discussion about that and a lot of passion around that topic, primarily because of our small one-person libraries, whom oftentimes really, really deeply care about the library and are not paid enough to justify a master's in library science. And some of them don't have a college degree, but they have a wide range of experience. And so after the group really went back and forth on that this is the language that they chose. Is there a particular language you would think would strengthen
Well,
that?
I certainly see it from that end. I'm thinking about it from the other end. I mean, what's to prevent a city commission of a much larger library saying, look, here's the standard. We don't need to hire a library director with an MLS.
Mhm. And that's,
Is there a way of maybe splitting this?
so in the essential standards, directors of libraries that serve over 25,000 are required to have a Master of Library Science or equivalent degree. Does that?
Where does it say?
Just up the page,
Just up the page.
11.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So I missed that.
Oh, that's okay.
So why is that split into a separate section? What's the difference between the two sections?
So the essential standards are the ones that libraries
excellent
must
standard.
meet to receive state aid. The excellent are what we hope they strive for. And the difference I would say would be was within the essential, the 25,000 is the cutoff for a master's degree. But all library directors are required to be certified by the state library. And the excellent, we're kind of saying that we would like it for any size library director to have a college degree.
But we're not requiring it for the essential.
Correct.
So that if a library director has been on the job and doing a terrific job for 25 years that has a high school degree, that director isn't going to be penalized.
So excellent is the aspiration and essential is a lower standard?
Yes.
So shouldn't that be flipped then?
Well, the current essential standards have always, or not always, but gosh, ever since I've worked with public library standards, have required library directors over 25,000 to have a master's in library science. I think the difference is the essential is putting that population limit on it, but there could be a better way to word that so that the excellent standard makes it clear that, you know, we're basically taking a population and saying you still have to be, need to have your master's if you're serving over 25,000 people. But we would love it if anyone's serving less than that.
And what are examples of those libraries that fall just over and just under that boundary?
Of the 25,000. I think the Bitterroot Public Library is just barely over the 25,000. I am not sure who's just under. I think the next gap is more significant.
Yeah, more significant.
Yeah.
Right. I think one of the other opportunities that we have in the standards to try to move that needle is looking at the salary standards.
Yes.
And in the excellence standards, having salary standards that libraries have to meet, because there really is this tension between what libraries are paying and the salary necessary to support someone with a degree coming in. You know, we know, we've been told by librarians that they've left their jobs to go work at the local convenience store because they can make more money. And so if we can put in place standards that try to better align salary expectations with other kinds of comparable libraries or other kinds of comparable departments within a community, hopefully then that drives the ability to attract degreed librarians into those positions. But right now we're struggling between that tension.
It might be possible to do that without using specific quantities, but look at outcomes. Salaries are enough to attract and retain library staff for some period. Look at outcomes. If you're paying X amount per year, but you're having to rehire every year, at least require libraries to examine their pay scale and see if the salary is a problem or maybe the director just had bad breath. But I mean, it seems like that maybe an outcome there would be good. I would like to say that as a 30,000 foot overview, that the work group that worked on this was very diligent and worked really well together, and were the right people for the job. I really thought that was great, and I think that Tracy deserves a round of thanks for the ever non-ending sort of editing that you had to do to pull things into focus. You know, this is going to set the tone for a decade, and so I think it's an incredibly important document. Where this differs in terms of policy from the existing standards is that it does a better job of aligning with the resolution, looking at user outcomes. Our libraries providing sufficient content and services to serve the people in their community. And it is sort of making that transition from describing what we do and how we do it to is what we're doing and how we're doing it having the effect we want on the community. I think that's one of the things that has been a lot of work, because it's hard to wrap even though we have been extolling this stuff, it's hard to wrap our heads around it. And so again, kudos to Tracy for that. The other big thing of this that I'm the most perhaps excited about is this gives us a chance to listen to tribal libraries, and if this is something that they want to do, gives us a method of incorporating these standards as a library development tool, et cetera, and to open up state aid possibly to tribal libraries, which is something that in my view should have happened 50 years ago. So I'm really excited by that.
Tracy, for the essential standards, so the libraries have to meet all of these to receive state aid. So I think that number 9 is very problematic for at least a lot of the smaller rural libraries. That would be one board member is certified by the Montana State Library. Having served on a board, nobody would do that. I mean, I did, but I mean, nobody else would. And they never have, you know, and they aren't now. And as on the executive board of MLA, I did a campaign to get board members to certify, and I put a lot of work into it and even offered a track at MLA, and it resulted in no additional board members certifying. So I think that, and since then MLA has has fallen in its offerings for board members, although I think the federations have picked up a lot of that slack. So I don't think you should necessarily throw it out, but I would be interested in how this ties in, and maybe Joe will talk about it with the new path to certification. Because really all this does is make it the responsibility of the librarian to insist that a board member do something. And so you're putting an employee in a position to insist that their employer do something that they're maybe not going to do. And I would just hate for a small rural library to lose funding because they can't get a board member to certify. It's not even that they can't get a board member to certify, they can't usually get board members to be board members. You know, and I feel like, I know that you had representation from all library types, but the kinds of libraries who would send representatives to work on this kind of task force are not the libraries that I'm talking about right now.
We did have some small libraries who are doing that.
Mm-hmm. There are some.
The thinking, I think, is that there's a strong correlation between having good boards and good libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really not the library director, it's really the state library saying boards need to take and up their game if the game is not up.
Yeah.
And so it really rests on the commission's shoulders, actually, not the director. And maybe there's a better way of getting board members engaged, but it strikes me that there is almost infinite room for improving boards in libraries, and that will pay dividends. And I view this as a useful way of doing it. But it strikes me that the library was not able to make this work, that would then become kind of a blinking red light, and we would take and aim the amazing persuasive powers of our library development unit to go and cajole them, and to, or even take board development to them, if that's what it took.
Right, and so that's where I'm thinking Joe might be able to help and come into play with the library, and then, you know, uses the board meeting time. I don't know what the librarian is supposed to do in this scenario, but if you're going to require it, then you have to make a path for that to work, and so maybe you try something new, because we have a lot of libraries that don't have any certified board members, and then maybe the first year you see how many people don't get state aid.
And again, I would be tempted not to use it punitively, particularly right off the bat, but
Right.
use this as a sort of like you're in a space capsule. It's a blinking light saying, "Oh, better pay attention to the oxygen scrubber." And you know, if a library does not have a certified board member, start working towards a process of using that as sort of an indicator that kind of work is necessary for that library, and emphasize. And failing a standard is actually a good thing, because that tells you what you need to work on.
So is it possible in the first year that if you see a failing standard that you don't withhold state aid?
Well, isn't there a mechanism for basically saying?
If I could address that.
Please.
So we actually changed the deferral process. So currently, libraries can ask for up to 3 years of deferral on standards. If they cannot meet them, then they can show a good reason for why. And Jenny can grant a 1-year extension.
Okay.
As we were talking as a group, we realized some of these standards are hard, and it may not be possible for the libraries to meet those in 3 years. And so the way that we did that is we're giving Jenny the power, and probably working with MSL staff and the library to come up with a plan for addressing that, and then granting a deferral depending on how many years they think it will really take. That particular standard was actually not on the draft of Essential until this last meeting in January. And the group had a long conversation about it, and they agreed that when a board member is certified, what they see is much more engagement and excitement. Board members do not have to earn the level of continuing education credit, as you know, as library directors. So I do want to say that in case others are not aware of that. They earn significantly fewer hours. It's 15 hours over 4 years. And many of them are becoming more active in federation meetings and so forth. It is definitely pushing, and it may not work. And I agree with you that the people who can come and serve on the task force may not be the ones that will be the most impacted by these. And I would like to talk to them. And I think it's Pam, Suzanne, and I, it's our job to go talk to those little librarians and advocate for them, you know, if we need to. And so I think that's a really good one to make sure we point out to the librarians and to say, what do you think about this? And be able to say, here's why, but truly, is this putting you as a librarian in the position of having to nag your bosses to become certified, and what does that mean for you? And it's not just that, it's of course the continuing education costs. I agree that there is room, and we do board trainings all the time, and we may need to up our own travel budgets to be able to support it, depending on how many libraries say this is a standard we cannot meet.
If it's important, it's not working, we work to figure it out.
Right.
And I think to Jamie's question earlier about engaging our local governments about what the standards are, what they mean, the intended impact, it's the county commissioners and local officials that appoint board members. And I think as part of that appointment process, there should be a conversation about the expectations of board members. This, of course, being one of them.
So I have a question. Tracy, I don't know what was previous in 2010 to what we have an overlay of new. So I'm going to come back to the essential as well as the excellent on personal salary benefit and certification directors. Was that ever in there before in 2010?
So the certification piece has always been existent, actually even before 2010.
So the certification was, but the salary and the benefit discussion wasn't ever?
No, I do not believe so.
And what was the
impetus?
Yes.
Honestly, it's the knowledge that we have library directors who they're responsible for budgets, responsible for working with the board, responsible for managing and running a library, and they're making less money than a convenience clerk at a convenience store. And we have library directors who are, and sometimes it's surprising, who must work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet because the salaries can be considerably lower. And I think that's because there's a stereotype about librarians and that all they do is check in and check out books. And we need to overcome that stereotype because when you sit down and you talk with a county commissioner or council member about really the level of work that's required of library directors, I think it helps them understand that they need to reclassify that position or work with the board to reclassify that position to get those wages. And the hope was that by having that as a standard, we could encourage that conversation.
So I don't discredit anything that you're saying on that.
Yeah.
Coming back to our very rural nature of who we are and the county commissioner discussion of budget. And that's what this is.
Yes.
And I don't know if we are going to, how do I want to say, tie up the hands of someone because there is no money for that. And yet the standard is saying that they must do that. And I believe in outcome. I believe in data. I don't know if the money factor, and I say don't disbelieve what you said, will drive the outcome of the general mission, which is, to act, to develop better, because that's what standards are. They're a line in the sand. And I believe the essentials are the floor, the excellence are the sky. So somehow there has to be something in between there. But I would be concerned about putting anything about compensation driving an outcome in a standard base. We do standards in education all the time. And of course, we're dealing with children. But we do not have a standard that has driven anything in compensation. That would be up to a different authority than what I believe is afforded here.
Libraries can choose to go for a dedicated levy. The Montana Code gives them that. And I think it's important to encourage libraries to consider that and go to the community and put it to the community and say, what do you think? This is what library services would really cost. Would you support additional mills for the library for that purpose? And then the code also says the library board does set the salaries as well. I agree. There's a lot of complications to doing the salary piece. And it's not just that, just speaking from my experience as a former public library director, the county commission and the clerk had to think about all the people in county government and make sure that all their salaries were equitable. And so that sometimes meant that even though library staff might feel they should be paid more, if you compared them to people doing similar work within the county, they actually were paid fairly by that standard. And so that's a complication that exists too. And I do recognize it. Is it kind of that you're saying perhaps that should just be an excellent standard and not an essential standard? Is that...
I think it's a local control issue.
Okay.
I don't believe that it's something that the state library can set as a standard. And if it hadn't been there before, and then maybe the comment period is open currently. So maybe what we do is we determine if there is anybody, maybe I'm just out there as a lone voice, but maybe there would be some comment that might come back, not to neuter or make it less, but maybe redirect it more in a local control voice. That's what I'm looking at.
I do think what you just said is very important, and to reiterate, Jenny, that this is the beginning of the comment period, and so we may hear more about that. And I'm also very excited that we're going to make this the focus of the conversation with the commission, because I think we'll get a lot of good feedback there that we might not capture in other forms of public comment. So does anybody else have any comments on public library standards. After we finish this agenda, then we'll have a 10-minute break before we move on.
Thank you, Tracy.
A question about so I see the deferrals piece at the end. We've talked about this, but what happens if a library is still not compliant after a given period of time?
Then they, if they go through their 3 or 4 years of deferrals, then they don't receive state aid. And every once in a while we have that happen.
Does that need to be stated here, or is that stated somewhere else?
It's stated in the state aid statute. I don't remember if it's stated explicitly in the existing administrative rules or not.
I actually use the language of the existing.
So it probably doesn't.
I'll
So
check on that.
yeah.
I mean, it's just sort of, it just doesn't, it says how to address. It doesn't say what happens if you
The
don't
consequence.
address.
That's something that we could certainly think about adding.
Well, there's certainly a carrot and a stick aspect to this.
Yeah.
I think it's wise to emphasize the carrot.
I
But
agree,
but not to ignore the stick.
but there's no
Yeah.
stick.
Yeah, yeah.
I really like this,
Yeah.
Tracy.
Yeah.
I think this is really well done.
I just wanted to draw attention to the essential standard that requires a library to be working on at least one excellent standard. I think it's that balance between libraries that might become complacent in just simply meeting that essential standard and having that library identify what new services, what new impacts they want to have in their community, and looking to the standards as a way to help drive that forward. So again, just another way we can use the standards as a tool to continue to develop excellent library services around the state.
Okay. Thank you, Tracy. Oh, Kenning, did you have another thought?
This is just sort of on my mind because MSU is currently developing a new policy to replace its bicycle policy, and it's converting it to a personal mobility policy because we're talking now about scooters and other kinds of devices that help people get around. So I'm just wondering if maybe you have bicycling specifically called out there, walking, driving, bicycling, or taking public transportation.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Broadening that language.
What do you call them? Personal mobility
devices. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Good.
I like it.
That's
Thank
my
you.
that's my truck.
Hoverboard.
That's my truck.
Yeah, right.
Anne's horse.
I don't think it qualifies as personal though. Because personal would be one person. Driving is in there already.
Tracy has a lot to think about on that one.
Yeah, that was another recommendation from the task force.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I used the language Bruce sent it to me of a group that's been working on improving transportation corridors, so that's where I got the language.
The kind of the open street stuff,
Yes.
Yeah.
which is. But I think actually what Kenning suggests is probably more current language that could be shoehorned. Well, not even shoehorned. Could slip neatly into the overall complete streets sort of model. You just make it, however people get to the library, you make it as easy as possible for them to do it safely and conveniently.
Oh, and it also opens up I know that a lot of, at least in our community, skateboarding
Right.
is looked down upon, but if
Oh.
you say personal mobility device, then, perhaps you have to look at that policy, and if that is the only way that person gets around, yet you don't allow their skateboard on the property, then you are excluding those people.
That's a good
Well,
point.
and when someone brings a skateboard into the library because they got to the library on the skateboard, they need to have a convenient place that they can put it down so they can open a book or whatever without people tripping over the damn skateboard and breaking their neck, right? I mean, that's an issue.
And that's the issue of banning them.
Yes.
They're always in the way type of, but
So,
yeah.
so maybe instead of banning them, we should figure out some sort of clever stable for skateboards.
But I think that that broader umbrella also. Sorry, just looking. That broader umbrella also includes assistive.
Yeah.
Mobility
Yeah.
devices.
Yes,
I'll send it to
absolutely.
you. I'll send you the.
That'd be great.
I have it right here.
Thank you. All right, it is 11:09 and we will reconvene at 11:20. Okay, no.
Interrupt. I'm Nanette Gilbertson. I'm with the Montana Library Association, and I just wanted to share a couple of my thoughts on the public library standards, the draft. First of all, I've seen the state library and this commission go through task forces and councils in the past to look at issues or challenges, and it's always done very thoroughly and been a very effective process. And I view this as the same way. It's inclusive, and I appreciate that you had librarians of all sizes on your task force. But I am really looking forward to all of the upcoming public comment through the official ARMS process. As a stakeholder with other state agencies, there's not always that extensive of a public comment period. So that's really important for our librarians. And I will just encourage them to take a deep dive into the draft standards and to come up with their honest feedback and give that to all of you so you can make a good decision. I love what Tracy said about these standards, encouraging development and growth and evolution of our libraries, acknowledging that that's what has happened over the past couple of decades, but also maintaining standards that are attainable and recognizing the nature of our state. So I just very much appreciate that. And then I always look at issues and challenges and changes through the political lens. And so that's how I'm looking at this. State aid is not a foregone conclusion from our state government. We have to go back every 6 years and advocate for that statutory appropriation to be reauthorized. And I think it gives the state aid funding more credibility when the state library says, we don't take this as a foregone conclusion. We evaluate what the standards are and how people can meet those standards and then be awarded their state aid funding. And we are not complacent. We're going to ensure that that state aid funding is going to the public libraries that are meeting the needs of their communities. So for all of the work you've already done and all of the work that you have coming up, I appreciate it. Regarding some of the comments about how small libraries are going to meet standards, I think maybe there's a role for MLA there to, you know, if it's a mentorship program or an educational opportunity, but I think there is an opportunity. So I hope that you, and I know you do, I don't have to hope, I know you, the members of MLA and all of your libraries as partners. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Nanette, for speaking on behalf of MLA. Do you have a question for Nanette?
No, I just have a little bit of a historical perspective. A couple iterations ago on the standards process, I was participating in one of the big objects of discussion, very similar in terms of complexity of talking about money, finances, salaries, was whether libraries should provide reference service over the telephone. And that was actually built at in the same process of wondering whether libraries should have telephones. Wow. So we have come miles. We have come many miles. It just it's not obvious to us because here we are, but we've come many miles and the standards process has been part of what's propelled us forward. So.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Does anybody else have a comment? I don't want to cut off anything. All right. We will reconvene at 11:25. Okay.
And I understand yours.
So there's some great discussion that can continue after following meeting and throughout the public comment period. So the next, let me get in the right place. The next agenda item is the study administration of the Montana Natural Heritage Program. Jenny's going to speak and then I'll provide the framework for public comment.
Well, thank you. I don't have a lot more to add since we met last week in our work session, but I just wanted to add some additional points of clarity that I hope add some clarity and minimize some of the confusion and questions that came out of the work session that we had last week, particularly with regard to any kind of lines between what the core services are and how we have the ability to fund them and the opportunities for future kinds of grants and contracts. And so you have in your materials, and Marlis has posted online, a further refinement of the chart that we shared with the commission at their work session last week, where we've really identified what we mean by the information management work and what we mean by the research work. And what I hope that we're articulating is a vision where the administration of the Heritage Program, including that strategic direction and the ability to guide the future of the program, clearly falls under the authority of the state library. And the program coordinator and the information services staff, those staff that are responsible for managing the information and ensuring that our partners and our patrons have access to that information, are employees of the state library. We don't currently have the funding to fully fund all of the senior science staff. So those staff would remain employees of the University of Montana under a revised contract. And instead of being this sort of open-ended contract with the university, we would ask for a contract essentially for deliverables in the terms of the time that those science staff spend in doing the core work of the program, specifically species and ecological systems rankings, in handling mediated requests, in helping to provide that kind of subject matter expertise necessary to make sure that we're efficiently and effectively managing the information through the information services staff. Negotiating that contract, looking at the budget, we think we can fund a continuing about 30% of their time, which is largely what's being funded right now. All of the existing research-oriented grants and contracts that are currently being administered by the university would remain at the university. Currently, about 30% of that overhead the university directs back to the operation of the program. We would negotiate that amount with them. But again, all of those existing contracts would not have to transfer. They would remain with the university. And then all of the staff that are funded, all of the operations that are conducted under those grants and contracts would remain with the university. So the concerns that we heard from partners prior to the December meeting are really addressed in that way, because we would not be seeking to change those agreements. That, again, they would exist as is. In the future, as we have funding and the ability to hire those core science staff, we would hire those positions here at the state library with the understanding that the goal is that the majority of their time is spent doing a lot of that information coordination work, a lot of the outreach work that goes along with the senior science staff. To a question that was raised, that certainly doesn't mean that those staff wouldn't have the ability to seek grants and contracts and work under grants and contracts administered through the state library. But our goal is to be able to fund or fully fund those specific positions. And at the same time, not only the University of Montana, but the broader university system would have the ability to seek grants and contracts in the name of the program. Any resulting data and information would come back into the infrastructure of the Heritage Program at the State Library to be made available to our patrons and partners through that information infrastructure. But really, there's an opportunity for the university system to grow the opportunities for grants and contracts funding, as long as it meets the mission of the program, really in an unlimited way. And in that way, we see this as a win-win for the core heritage program work, as well as our partners in the university system, where we're saying that there is an allocated, dedicated amount of funding that we can use to make sure that we are meeting those core responsibilities. Staff aren't feeling like they have to be torn between working on projects and working on their core work. and at the same time opening up a window for the University of Montana and the wider university system to generate more and more information to support the program through a potentially unlimited amount of grants and contracts. We've had conversations with the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Ed about this proposal. I've had 2 conversations with Tyler Trevor, the Deputy Commissioner, since last Monday's work session. He has expressed to me and asked me to express to the Commission that they believe this recommendation is reasonable and that they see great potential in a partnership with the broader university system, and that OCHI stands ready to negotiate an umbrella agreement that would allow for that kind of relationship with the entire university system, and that they stand ready to be the point of contact to develop that umbrella relationship, as well as to develop a transition agreement with the University of Montana. So I hope that you can see that we've listened to our partners, that we've listened to the staff, that we believe that we've come up with a model that allows us to implement our ideal version of the Heritage Program, where again, this isn't a silver bullet with regard to funding, but it puts that future direction where it belongs, in our hands. We've articulated the kinds of staffing models that we think are necessary to be sustainable in the future, while allowing for future growth. As I've said before, our responsibility, our statutory responsibility, and our responsibility to our partners is to ensure the stability of this program for the future. I don't believe it's appropriate for us to continue to contract for that future direction. This recommendation squarely puts that responsibility in the hands of the State Library Commission and the State Library to implement, but in a way that I think is directly responsive to our partners and our patrons, and as OCHI said, creates great potential for that kind of future working relationship with them.
Okay. This is an action item for today, but before we talk about action, I want to have a final public comment period. And I want to thank the Commission. We've had an extensive, and all of you for commenting, we've had an extensive public comment period, and I really appreciate all of the feedback that some of you in the room and online and others have given. And I want you to all know that the Commission has read and heard all of your comments, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about your feedback and your input while in the process of making this decision. So having said that, the process for public comment today is that each person who is interested in providing public comment, we're happy to hear that and we're going to limit that to 3 minutes per person, and then the Commission will discuss, and commissioners may have additional questions for anybody based on what they heard in their public comment time. So having said that, is there anybody who would like to offer public comment? Bryce?
I have some commentary that I want to provide for staff that I'll pass around, and also Linda Nance is not here in person, so she asked me to print it out for feedback. Okay, I'll sit.
I'd actually like to speak after you, Bryce.
Sure. Yeah. Just handing them the hard copy. I wanted to start by saying what I've tried to do in this is summarize feedback that I've gotten from staff on the latest proposal. And it in no way says that it's a complete summary of staff. I've asked them to provide additional commentary if they have additional feedback. Staff understand the desire of the state librarian and the commission to do what they think is best for maintaining the functions of the Heritage Program. We appreciate the work that's being conducted on our behalf through the legislature, through House Bill 633. We appreciate the fact that you clearly took some of our feedback to heart from the December meeting. However, questions remain among staff as to whether the mission of the program is best served under the direct MSL administration. The second introductory comment I wanted to make is this process has highlighted some major differences in approach, process, and documentation that seem to be arising from differences in our background training as scientists versus librarians. Some examples of that are a NEPA process that our staff is very familiar with and provides really thorough documentation on what is being proposed, and then has this long, formal process for incorporating that feedback. And that was part of what happened, I think, at the December meeting, is that we were all expecting a big, thorough document. Other background differences, I think, are the degree of sort of grilling that we get when we put in a proposal. And so just wanted to provide that as a difference. And then also, this will come up again later in the commentary, but background on motivation and the need for staff to maintain their credentials, publish, and also raising funding if they're going to move on in their career. Anyway, the bottom line with that is we need to work more diligently to understand our respective needs to do our jobs effectively. And this process, third, has also highlighted to us the many complexities of our program. They're probably not fully understood by anyone in the room, including myself. So I'm not pointing any fingers there, and neither are staff. But we look at this as maybe that development of that overarching MOU is a good way of grounding the commission, the university, and staff in what individual components of the program need to do their jobs. Throughout this process, we've talked about maintaining functions of the program, and I wanted to highlight some intermediate concerns and questions we have, and also for the long term, in terms of maintaining program functions. On the intermediate side, regarding MSL oversight, we have the question of what are the specific guidelines for accepting projects, and is there a change from what projects were acceptable in the past? And we're concerned that lack of clear guidance on that front would impact program function. Two, how quickly will projects be reviewed for approval by MSL? If the timeline is on the order of 1 or 2 days, that shouldn't affect program function. If it's on the order of weeks, that could affect program function. Under the finance plan, the question that comes up is, does the 2021 biennium financial plan put 4 staff positions in a potential bind during the next biennium, the 2023 biennium, if no funding comes through House Bill 633? That is, does it rely too heavily on current one-time only funding, return of indirect from or supplemental core contributions? And with regards to that, we just wanted to note that if the financial model includes indirects on supplemental core funding or contribution from then the MSL Commission and commissioners are encouraged to work with in understanding the availability of those funds before moving forward. And we just want to say we don't want to get into a bind where potentially in the next biennium, staff would have to be laid off. In terms of the long-term concerns or questions with maintaining program functions, much of this centralizes around maintaining motivations of organizations and individual staff members. So the questions that come up are, will the program be given discretion as to how to spend funds when full funding is available for science program lead funds? For example, could a program area split core funding into 2 co-lead positions in order to truly reduce their workloads, where they would both be maybe raising half of their funding through core and half through projects? If program science leads are fully funded, what mechanisms will ensure appropriate focus on statewide programmatic vision of products for partners rather than taxa or research of more personal interest? Again, I brought this up in the work session last week about maybe getting involved with esoteric taxa that are not at the forefront of what our partners need, the information needs our partners need. 3, how will the function of the science program leads and project managers be hampered when conducting fieldwork as a result of the inevitable accrual of comp time during what are often limited windows of time to document species or communities? Many of those species or communities are only available for documentation during very fine windows of time. 4, will science program leads under direct MSL administration be able to continue the important function of gathering field information that feeds into ranking of species and habitats? In many cases, we are the only entity around that gathers that type of information for our partners. 5, and commendably so, Jenny is the first state librarian who has taken a strong direct interest in the operations of Heritage Program. What mechanisms will ensure that future state librarians treat the Heritage Program as a co-equal program of the state library when it will likely not be viewed as a traditional library program by many individuals who might be applying for the position, i.e. they just won't be familiar with it. 6, hiring of all science leads under MSL seems to leave the university system with a decreasing stake in the program over time. What mechanisms will be put in place to prevent this in order to, and there's several points here. 1, avoid erosion of desired political support in the legislature and the governor's office that are coming from, hopefully, a more involved presence from the Office of Commissioner of Higher Education. 2, avoid loss of supplemental core funding provided by the university. 3, avoid impacts to the spatial analysis lab through waived rent on the UM campus and use of the off-campus indirect rate of 25% for state projects, 26% for federal projects, as compared to the on-campus rate of 45%, which would directly impact partners who may not be willing to pay those higher indirect rates. This also has the very real potential to disproportionately place pressure on the spatial analysis lab director and staff to oversee, as principal investigator, all university-based projects and raise additional project dollars through academic funding sources, resulting in an impact to the spatial analysis lab's core program functions. And 7, new point, will staff be able to purchase supplies while in the field at a moment's notice using project dollars, not being able to do this rather than their own personal dollars, that is, not being able to do this with something like a credit or pro card would change program function. And two final questions. I've added one more. What are the specific measures of success for the proposed transition? It would be good to hear from you on that. And 2, I wanted to note, this just came to me as Jenny was introducing things, and that is the differentiation between core funding and project funding is not a black and white. It is a very gray, shades of gray continuum. I just want to state that for the commission's reference. So thanks for your time.
Thank you. I think that we should go with Dr. Vance next because we have your hard copy here. Bryce passed that out to us. If you would like to offer public comment within the 3-minute time frame.
Okay. I'll cut out some things that are in the printed document. I mean, I want to start by saying I think that the current plan is a really significant improvement over the first plan, and I really appreciate everybody who's been involved, from the Jenny and Evan, the commissioners, Ochi and Scott, everybody involved in developing this new framework. But I got to say that I don't think that we're there yet with the current plan. Since this process started a couple of months ago, the plan's focus has had a really major shift away from ensuring the program's fiscal viability to now primarily giving the library authority over the program's strategic direction. And I really want to say that I understand that the library and commission want to have authority over something for which they've got responsibility. I think that's something that all of us share in our professional lives. But I think the current plan is a really drastic way to attain that authority, and that it has far-reaching financial and organizational impacts that are still shrouded in an awful lot of fiscal uncertainty. For one thing, as we've heard, it now does really not remedy the original illness that this was brought forward to address, which is the loss of core funding. It's really not clear to me that the library's goal of assuming more authority for the program requires this kind of dive into risky waters. If the library needs more say in the strategic direction of the program, I think there are ways to give the library and commissioners more authority over strategic direction without completely overhauling the structural and the financial arrangements that have been working well for Heritage and for our partners since this arrangement was implemented in 2006. So as an example, the Heritage Program strategic plan is currently in its final year. Our 5-year plan ends in June of 2020. So I'm saying, why not take this as a perfect opportunity for the Heritage Program managers, the MSL staff, and interested commissioners to work together to rebalance the lines of authority. You know, I want to say that whatever is decided about the future administration of this program, I would still like to see the commissioners in any case encourage more participation and more transparency in strategic planning than there has been in the past. I think that in recent years, the Heritage Program has become increasingly autonomous, and that we, and I point at myself, we have not been nearly as forthright as we could and should have been in terms of sharing our evolving directions with MSL administration. You can certainly read examples that I've listed of how I've been guilty of that. But I think that the solution to this is not to upend everything or to reverse the balance so that Natural Heritage Program managers and staff have no authority over the work for which they are responsible. I think the new plan is overkill. I think the library and the commissioners have the absolute right and the ability to be more involved in strategic planning for the Heritage Program, but I don't think they have to undertake such a far-reaching and disruptive change to do it. So what I would like to see as an outcome from this whole process is direction from the Commission to see if whatever needs changing can be changed in a way that doesn't undermine the functional integrity of the Heritage Program, the things that Bryce just talked about, and doesn't place a larger administrative burden on library resources. But even if the Commission decides to go ahead with this plan, then I respectfully request the commissioners to direct MSL staff to work collaboratively with Heritage Program managers and staff to develop a 5-year strategic plan together. You know, the balance between authority and responsibility is a very delicate one, and it really requires cooperation and transparency and commitment from everybody involved to get it right. If all we do is reverse roles, with the Heritage Program losing authority while continuing to have all the responsibility, we're only going to be substituting one problem for another. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Would anybody else like to offer public comment?
I am Brandon Burke-Holder, data analyst at the Montana Natural Heritage Program. I would like to start by thanking all the staff of Montana State Library and the Heritage Program, others, the university, for all their work on this proposal. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of hours that have been put into this work and invested by all parties in an attempt to improve the Natural Heritage Program. And that's a very admirable goal. And we all want it to be a very successful and vibrant program of the Montana State Library. It is clear to me, however, and hopefully to you as well, that this proposal will change the way the Natural Heritage Program currently operates, functions, and interacts with our partners. It is not just a simple transfer of administration. Many of these changes will be significant, and there are only a few that will measurably improve NHP. The staff has done its best it can to communicate with you the impacts of what a transition like this will have on the program, both positive and negative. And I hope you've been able to digest, it sounds like you have, all of our feedback that we've been able to give you. And I think you probably understand that there are numerous challenges that we're going to face in being able to execute this proposal. So the staff of NHP are some of the most hardworking and dedicated public servants in the state of Montana. We believe deeply in the mission of the Natural Heritage Program and have worked tirelessly to build its expertise and reputation, and don't want to see that diminished. That's why we're so passionately speaking out for the program. We will strive to maintain the quality of our work, the utility of all of our products, and our good standing with our partners if you approve this administrative change, even if we disagree with it. If you approve this proposal, I respectfully request that you regularly inquire about how this transition is progressing and stay informed of its effects on our program, and continue to offer whatever support you can to maintain the quality of the Natural Heritage Program. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment?
Hi, I'm Katie. I'll just Heritage. Just really quickly, I wanted to say thanks to Bryce and Linda and Rachel for their comments, and that I support what they've said, and a lot of what they said has been input from a number of members of staff. It incorporates our feelings on this very well. I don't want to repeat anything that they've said, so I just quickly wanted to say that I do have concerns that this proposal would impact the long-term financial stability of the program. One of the places where I think that really would be very obvious is in this step where you bring permanent science staff into the library and away from the university. We've talked a lot about why that might impact financial stability of the program, so I'm not going to repeat that. But I just did want to say that last week at the work session, there was at least one commissioner that suggested, or maybe it was Jenny, that moving forward with this process might go incrementally, and that you may take steps over the course of time, maybe not vote on the whole kit and caboodle today, but look at this process incrementally. And I just wanted to encourage you to consider that in your discussions with one another today, because I think it just shows a little bit more. It gives a little bit more time for considering what some of these concerns would be for the long-term stability of the program. But thank you for considering everything that we've said today, and I appreciate you doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to offer comment?
I'm Andrea Pitt. I'm a botanist at the Heritage Program, and I wasn't going to comment, but I'm supportive of the proposal to move over to the library. But I also understand how our program has become stronger because we have that flexibility with the university as well as being under the umbrella of the library. And so we've been able to do a lot of things that most of them fit within our core mission, but we're moving in a new direction that does need, what our mission is, what our direction is, does need to be reevaluated. And but I'm a little confused still in the proposal, and this is more kind of what I want to just relay, that I'm not quite understanding how the transition to the library would work at this point, and where the difference is between the core and the research. Like, for example, I submit Section 6 grants. I'm one of 2 state agencies able to submit those for work on federally threatened and endangered plants, and I don't really know, is that research or is that my core? So I'm kind of confused about that, and I'm a little confused about if you're bringing over the information management. I mean, am I in that information management? Where does botany fit? Because I'm in charge of the botany database. There's a lot of things in that botany database that I determine. It's not Karen Campbell, the Braden, or Chuck. So I'm a little confused about this whole transition and how it would work, especially if the databasing part is under a different administration, because I'm in charge of that database. But anyways, so
thank you.
Thanks.
Please.
Dan Bach, I'm the senior zoologist. So I thought I'd say that I think Bryce and Linda, and Kay, and Braden, and Andrew have covered things more eloquently than I think I can, and have made really good points that I'm supportive of. And I was trying to think what could be helpful and get down in the weeds about differences that would happen. And I think we're at a much larger scale than that, so I won't necessarily drag you through that. But I just like to say that I think moving forward, whatever direction that we go, I'd really encourage consultation with staff, and you know, we're a valuable resource, and you know, we know what we do. So I just throw that out there that you know, working with us to help understand what that is, because I really feel like we should emphasize that a lot of what we do isn't black and white; it's really gray. You know, kind of like Andrew alluded to. You know, there's this. You know, it's not simply that we have data that we disseminate. Oftentimes, the data that we need to rank species to get to our partners doesn't exist. That requires us to find money to go out and work with our partners. The other thing, just I'm a big fan of looking at other programs and other kind of paradigms to help understand, you know, what direction I should go with a lot of the stuff I do. And two things that come to mind are the BC program. They are statutorily required to rank every single species in their database every 3 or 5 years. That creates some very big challenges for them because they end up ranking a lot of lost species, other invertebrates, and they just say, well, we looked at it, we don't know. The other thing is California. We had a meeting, Heritage Fest, I think it was last October, maybe it was October before that. But I talked to some of my counterparts, and I was surprised that what they do is they delineate element occurrences. So they take species observation, they go on GIS, and they draw a line around where they think that animal is. And that's what they do. And I think that the flexibility of our program, the fact that we do get out and collect that data, provides us with some authority that maybe those folks in California who just, you know, draw maps around don't necessarily have. So I think that looking across the network, we are incredibly successful. And part of that is because, you know, we're not necessarily, you know, because we have some flexibility. So I guess, again, that probably wasn't as eloquent for its point, but I just wanted to throw that out there. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Does anybody else have public comment? Okay, hearing none, I'll bring the discussion to the commission. If there is further discussion or entertain action items, please feel free to ask questions of anybody who has offered public comment today.
Jamie would like to weigh in.
Hi, Jamie.
Thank you for your wonderful comments. I was listening very astutely to all of them. There was a comment that bubbled, maybe it wasn't even said, out of the work meeting a while back, and it was saying that maybe some of the scholarship, the PhD work, the integrity of the scholarship might be lost. And whether that was said or not, I have thought about that. I have been unable to sleep, some to thinking about that we would allow the integrity and the strength of the work that is done would not be held at the highest scholarly level. I have a BA in history, but I am dedicated to scholarship. I served for 30 years with the Montana Humanities, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and scholarship is what makes everything real and understanding. So I like all of your comments, but if the state library ever drops its dedication to the scholarship that this program provides, I would be sorely disappointed. So I don't know if I'm getting out here on slippery ground, which is why I stayed home, but I like what we're doing, and I think that it will be a stronger, better organization for the Heritage Program and the State Library if we work together and continue to work on this transfer. But I really, really think that the best thing that we can do is keep the scholarship at the highest level. That will bring in more money, it will give it more integrity and more reliability for both entities. There, I'm done.
This is Ken. I'd like to weigh in as well.
I can.
I completely agree with Jamie, and she said a large part of what I wanted to say. I am supportive in terms of our statutory obligation of bringing the director and the. I still have some questions, but the information management coordination into the state library at this time. But I am not supportive at this point and have a lot of questions, and I think we need a lot of additional discussion, as some of the heritage staff said, to look at other programs. I think the sample size for that in the state libraries is probably pretty small, but there's a lot to be gained from that. And I have a lot of open questions, and I don't think my concerns are not answered in terms of bringing the senior scientist staff into the library. I know that's not proposed at this time, but I don't want to be in any way locked into that portion of the discussion at the current time until there's more discussion about it, until we've had if we were to approve this, bringing the director and the information staff over, until we've been able to, the library's been able to negotiate with OCHI and see how well it works to direct the contract in terms of core research, core services, as well as project work. Because I've worked in project work my entire career, and I know there's a lot of gray area there. I'm also still very concerned about the fact that I think everybody agrees nobody at the library has stated that this will solve the problem of decline of core funding and funding in general. But I really feel strongly that I do not want to support something that locks us in any way now or in the future, pending further discussion about bringing the senior science staff into the library. And I won't go into, we've talked about this a lot, I won't go into any more details about that, but I would also like to just briefly say that I'm very supportive of gaining additional contract expertise within the state library for other purposes and looking at further contract work. And I think there's probably more of that even beyond heritage in our future. So, but that's my 2 cents at this point.
Thanks, Ken.
And can we clarify what we're actually being asked to approve today?
I'm not allowed to make motions.
No, I know, but what I see in the documentation in the document for OCHI in the recommendation section is staff recommends that the commission act to approve a transition of the administration and operation of the Montana Natural Heritage Program from the University of Montana to the State Library over an 18-month period, concluding at the end of the 2021 biennium. Is that the only recommendation?
Yeah, the recommendation is to the commission that the commission give the State Library direction to directly administer the program and to negotiate that transition with OCHI and the University of Montana.
I envisioned it as a 2-part consideration, that being the first half, and I think though that you did include the part that I was talking about, but they are 2 parts. I think
Right, but that
first of all,
is what I'm seeing it's what's missing from the written recommendation.
Directing the state library to work with OCHI, is that
that's the part that's missing, because I mean there's a difference between approving a transition versus negotiating a transition.
It could be a 2-part motion.
It could be. I'm just saying that's not expressed.
So Ken, I actually have been I've been working on a motion for about, well, since almost our last in-person commission meeting. And it's changed at least a half a dozen times to reflect the conversation we've had both amongst ourselves and with staff. And I'm prepared to kind of offer that motion after everyone's had a chance to talk, that I think it satisfies your concerns. I hope it satisfies your concerns.
And if you were to make a motion, we could continue discussion. It wouldn't preclude discussion.
Well, then
I would like to hear that motion too, but I'm just wondering before that if Jenny would like to respond to any of the public comment that we heard.
If it'd be helpful to the commission, I'd be happy to answer the questions that Bryce laid out.
I think you've answered many of them. But yeah.
I mean, I don't
How about
want
the
to.
new ones?
I don't want to take up time unnecessarily, but a lot of these are questions that have been asked and answered, but I recognize that staff continue to have concerns, staff continue to have questions, and in the interest of transparency and understanding that it takes good constant communication, I'm happy to continue to have the opportunity to talk about these kinds of questions. One of the if the commission is interested.
Please. Yeah.
With regard to the questions about the timeline, the specific guidelines for grants and projects, I don't know that you can necessarily say that there are hard and fast guidelines for every kind of grant and project other than looking at your statute and looking at the core mission of the program as that guiding principle. One of the reasons why I feel strongly that the program coordinator should be a staff of the state library is that person becomes a go-to person for us to rely on to help evaluate those grants and contracts in the same way the program coordinator does now. So I don't see that process necessarily having to change. Were a grant or a contract come available where there was some uncertainty, I would expect the program coordinator to have a conversation with Evan and myself, but that doesn't need to be a lengthy process. With regard to the financial plan, we haven't allocated any of the one-time only monies for the transition, so the plan isn't reliant on any one-time only monies. With regard to the project and supplemental funding, we've already had conversations with Ochi and Scott about funding that they are willing to pass through to the state library. The financial analysis, as the finance committee knows, is based on a very conservative project dollar amount and the existing pass-through funding that passes through to the administration of the program now. So while we might try to negotiate for a higher rate, none of the financial analysis is based on a reliance on additional funds beyond a very conservative analysis of the existing funds of the program. To the question about discretion on how the funds are spent, what we are proposing is that the program would be a program of the state library. And as we talked about earlier with regard to the EPP process, that's a process that involves the state librarian, the commission, and all of the lead staff in looking at what our work plan priorities are and what our budget proposals are for how we spend those funds. So there wouldn't be the degree of autonomy that the program has now. We would follow similar functions as we do for the broader state library in administering the program. With regard to the science leads and their interaction with partners, I hope that we've, even today at this meeting, demonstrated how closely our lead staff, be it our water information staff or our librarians, rely on and work with our partners to inform our work. And whether those are senior science staff that work for the state library or project funded staff that are working within one of the campuses of the university system. That work is part and parcel of the work of the library, and we know we are not successful if we are not engaged with our partners. And that would absolutely be an expectation of all of the staff of the state library, including the heritage program. I've said that time and time again. With regard to gathering field information, this was a question that Bryce had brought up and brought to me again. I don't think there needs to be a line in the sand where we say that staff that are employees of the state can't do field work, and only those staff at the university are the ones that can take on those kinds of grants and contracts. What I would like to see is a senior scientist who is working for the state library, who recognizes that there's a data gap in a particular species area, and before ranking can occur, that person can either go after a grant or a contract to do that work under their authority at the state library, or say there is a more appropriate person working for this academic institution, and I'm going to work with that partner to find a grant or a contract that's going to allow that work to happen under their authority. What we're proposing gives us that kind of flexibility, and doesn't have to draw a line in the sand right now. You know, some of the questions about the future, the guarantee, and the future state librarians will take an interest in the program. That's going to be on additional future commissioners to ensure, and the existence of the statute to continue to provide that kind of direction. With regard to the science leads decreasing their stake in the program, I hope that that would not be the case. And again, in our communication with OCHI, they see great potential in this kind of program. And I think we can work with OCHI and U of M and the other affiliate campuses to really help engage in this vision of what the program could be. With regard to the erosion of political sport, again, this is something that I can't guarantee. We would have to look to the future. One of the things I can tell you coming out of our conversations with OCHI is that they were very concerned that they didn't feel like they'd had an opportunity to be more engaged, to advocate on behalf of the program, and committed to us in those meetings to be a stronger voice to advocate for the program. So I in no way see that resulting in an erosion of political support. And in fact, I think it could have the opposite effect. With regard to avoiding the loss of the supplemental core funding, I think in the future, we shouldn't have to rely on supplemental core funding if in fact we have adequate funding to administer the program overall. That supplemental core is there because we don't have adequate funding, and our partners recognize that for the success of the program, they need to contribute financially. We talk about long-term metrics. One of my long-term metrics is that we have adequate core funding so that we're not reliant on supplemental core in the future. We've talked a bit about what a negotiation might look like for the spatial analysis lab. That is something that would need to be negotiated in a final negotiation with OCHI, but what we've proposed is that in exchange for the reciprocal funding that we provide for the staff that are maintained here, the University of Montana staff that would remain here, both for their rent and their IT support and other kinds of administrative costs, that we negotiate a reciprocal agreement for the spatial analysis lab on the campus of the university. With regard to whether or not staff will be able to purchase supplies in the field, all of the existing grants and contracts will continue to be administered by the University of Montana. So it's up to the University of Montana to administer those programs, and I don't anticipate any change in how those programs are administered. I'm sure I maybe missed one or two, so if I did, hold me accountable to them. With regard to Kenning's question about the motion, I think that the first part of the motion has to, if the commission is comfortable, give the state library clear direction that you believe it is our responsibility to directly administer the program. And you either believe that or you don't. If you believe that, then there is direction to negotiate a contract for the operational aspects of the transition, and an agreement that allows them to conduct research in the name of the program. If you don't agree, then you should just continue to direct the state library to have some kind of contract with the university system and the U of M for the administration of the program as it is. But I think that key piece of whether or not you believe this is a program we should directly administer needs to be articulated first and foremost, so that we have the necessary direction to understand what our relationship with the University of Montana is.
Thank you.
Bruce, would you give us your motion?
Aaron, do you have Elsie?
Will you agree with me? No.
I
Go
agree.
ahead, Erin, please.
I just want to again thank everybody for giving us their input. I no way diminish your fears, but I feel like what's been happening with the public input is fear-based, and that worries me, that we don't have the type of communication that we need to not spiral into what ifs. I'm really frustrated with the what if spiral. I mean, we can what if till we die. What if the next librarian doesn't think this is important? Well, that's what a good leader does, is they build their programs so that the next person is expected to think that the programs within the library are important. So I don't worry about that. I also have seen the library grow exponentially in the last 6 years, and none of it was done without thought. So I feel like these are current fears, and I totally understand that, but I also have full faith in our state library to do what is right, which is to make sure that they continue to work with partners, that they continue to, if it's bringing in someone to help from the outside. I just don't feel like some of the fears about the ability of the state library are maybe, people just don't understand what type of responsibility the state library takes to everyone it serves, which is a huge amount of people, partners, the public within the state. And so, I give full faith to the library to do what is right. And part of doing what is right to me is understanding what your responsibility is and taking responsibility for that. So to me, having an open-ended contract is not responsible. When we started talking about it, it actually kind of took me by surprise, because we are so diligent about how we work with people that it was shocking to think that we have this loose end floating around. and that worries me, especially if we have the responsibility for the program. So, you know, I think it would be, you know, good for us to move forward to come up with, to have some of the administrative responsibility and to do our due diligence to make sure that questions are answered, policies or procedures are put in place, and that, you know, of course, we want to be at the table during strategic planning. You know, that is part of the commission. Years ago, we did strategic planning for the library, and I understand how powerful that can be. I mean, that was maybe 5 years ago, and that has led to the, you know, the growth that we've seen in the last 5 years. You know, and maybe this would also be completely a little off topic, but a good time for the commission to go back and to look to make sure that we're not, you know, the world has changed in 5 years, that maybe we need to do some strategic planning as well. But I just, you know, I want to say that I support the state library in moving forward with taking administration. And that I really hope that everyone involved, that we can work with everyone to just allay those fears, and not work in an environment of what if, because that will never get us anywhere. So those are kind of my feelings and my thoughts about everything I've learned in the last 2 months.
Thank you. Would anybody like to propose a motion or discuss further?
Yeah, I'd like to say something if I could, and it could be happening in the discussion with the motion. I know the motion is going to be crafted, and there's probably going to be more words that are going to be added, maybe some taken away when that motion is there.
Friendly amendments will be welcome.
Of course, of course. The interesting thing that I think Linda brought up is the strategic plan and the 5-year planning process. I think that should be in a partnership, and that is a strong verb, should. I believe that's the incremental approach that I'm asking for. And that's that milestone believability that we are not doing harm in this transfer. Administration can be 100%. It can be with conditions going on to others. There could be conditions within that administration, like we're talking about with the senior scientists at this point. And I think we need to, when we craft this, we need to give direction. But we are here as commissioners to help give guidance. And we're not doing this in a vacuum. I used that word earlier this morning. So I'm waiting to see what this motion will be so that we do no harm, but we do plan forward. But we can't do this alone. We have to do this with the comments that were here, and they know their job. They know their vision. We have to incorporate that into who we are at this time. And that takes a lot of understanding from commissioners. And I think we're there. I think we have heard things. I may personally have wanted more. I may personally have gotten another idea in my head. I may personally want to think I need to, and I don't want to use the word delay negatively. I believe, though, let's look at what we can offer in conditions, in time frame, and in using as a do no harm umbrella overall, and see if that works. We're all very thoughtful, caring people, and we are listening, and I hope that they understand that we are listening. It's the we, it's the pronoun we. So I'm ready for a motion. Sir?
Well, before I make my motion, I'd like to speak a little bit about my childhood.
Okay.
A few brief comments.
Is that a 3-minute too as well?
Yes.
Please.
3 minutes.
No, I just to say that I had said before, I believe that this program is a gem, and I think that it's its mission is part and parcel of the state library's mission. I think that they are, you know, some sort of Venn diagram. They're just as much part as GIS work we do and the bibliographic work we do. And I've long admired the Heritage Program, and more than that, I've admired the people who work at the Heritage Program. I think if I didn't have such confidence in the people who are in the Heritage Program and the administration of the state library, I wouldn't be making this motion. You know, I'm pretty sure we won't get everything right in this transition, you know, right off the bat. But I think that we're smart enough and kind enough and tough enough that we can kind of find our way through and come out the other side with something better. If I didn't think that was true, I guess I wouldn't propose this. As I said to my friend Elsie, I think I would welcome friendly amendments to this. My motion has 3 parts. Each one is one run-on sentence. So here we go. And I can ship this, Marlis. I can ship this to you. So
you're making one motion or 3?
I'm making one motion. It has 3 parts because they're interdependent. So first part, I move the state library assumes the role of Montana Natural Heritage Program Administrator, period. This transition would include MSL negotiating agreements with OCHE, allowing U of M to retain its current research-based contracts along with project-funded staff and ensuring that all current contract obligations can be met. Some of this language I stole directly out of conversations we've had over the last couple of weeks. And finally, in addition, the state library is directed to work with OCHE towards an umbrella memorandum of understanding, allowing affiliate campuses to administer grants and contracts in the name of the Montana Natural Heritage Program.
Can you repeat the middle sentence?
This transition would include the state library negotiating an agreement or agreements with OCHE, allowing the University of Montana to retain its current research-based contracts along with the project-funded staff and ensuring that all current contract obligations can be met. In other words, let's not upset the cart.
Okay. And the third sentence again.
In addition, the state librarian is directed to work with OCHE towards an umbrella memorandum of understanding, allowing affiliate campuses to administer grants and contracts in the name of the Montana Natural Heritage Program. So what this does is effectively transfers, my intent is to transfer kind of that authority and power from U of M exclusively to OCHE, who I presume would then transfer it back to all the campuses, including tribal campuses, we hope. I'm going to read the whole thing again.
Yes.
I'll ship it to you. So are there, well, it has to be seconded before we can do friendly amendments, right?
Is there a second?
A second. Is there any way we can project it?
How about this? How about this? Let me zap this to Marlis, and then you can just project your email, right?
Actually, Bruce, we can get Bruce access, right? Or does he have to have the?
I'm
Share your screen.
very afraid.
Yeah.
Great.
Should be able-
I second.
Thank you, Jamie.
Hey, Marlis, I'm sending you an email. I'm willing to try this other thing, but it fills me with deep loathing and fear. There you go. My God. It's not just mine.
Tell if is that big enough for you guys to all to be able to read?
Wow, we're actually seeing technology work.
Yeah, it's, if they can see it over there, yeah.
Is that big enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Not copy and paste.
Well, it hasn't passed and it hasn't undergone an amendment process.
I still need to have the original.
Like I say, I would not propose this if I didn't have faith in state library staff, which in my view includes the heritage. There's a lot of wisdom and a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah. Yes.
They should be sharing.
We're sharing a screen.
So if they're not. I think there's some overlap between the third sentence and the first part of the second sentence, but I think that's okay.
I view those as two separate processes.
Do you? Okay. The first one
The motion,
in regards to the current contracts,
And then the future.
and then the second one is moving forward. Okay.
hey Marlis, can you show this on the screen somehow? All I can see on the screen is the original chart.
Sorry, I thought we had.
Sorry, I'm still learning Zoom, but I swear I'll get it. Let's see.
To the left.
One to the left.
One to the left. Thank you.
Okay, we got it.
Thank you.
So one of the things in this an amendment or in conditions is timing. And I don't see timing here in reflecting cautiousness. And
The intent is the word transition in the second sentence is intended to reflect that. As opposed to just bang, it happens. And we've also seen exhibits showing proposed transition timing and sequence as part of this process.
But Bruce, the way that this is worded now, it's like up or down on the first sentence. So if you vote for the first, I move that the state library assumes the role of administrator, and that's a yes, then is that it's not clear that the second sentence modifies that by making it a transition.
No offense, but I think that there's a motion on the floor, and I think that the time for public comment is done unless the chair wishes to change that.
Yeah, and if somebody has if somebody would like it to ask a specific question of someone who offered public comment, that's allowable, but at this time it's a commission discussion.
Wasn't Jamie's point a discussion point?
That wasn't Jamie's.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But to answer her question, I view this as one deal that has got three separate parts, but each part is dependent upon the other parts. All parts need to kind of happen and be successful for the motion for this process to go forward successfully.
Do any of the commissioners wish to offer any additional friendly amendments? Nope.
Just to comment on Elsie's comment, I worry a little bit that adding a time frame may be a mistake. I mean, I know that we are trying to get some of these positions in place by the biennium in 21. But I think by constraining the state library to do what it needs to do with the time frame is maybe short-sighted to say you only have this much time to do it. And so if they're not ready to do it in that time, or maybe they hit it out of the ballpark right away, but I want to give them the ability to do what needs to be done without the constraints of a time frame. I think that's, to me, a little worrisome to say you have to do this within 18 months. And does that kind of answer your worry about not having an actual time frame on here?
well, I understand that time boxes people, within whatever constraint capacity that there might be within that spectrum box. But I used it in the word of cautionary to allow this transition to be able to be believed. And again, I come back to the no harm. And I think the amount of time should be based on ensuring that the program is successful and that it does no harm to the library either. And that we have, so that Montana is served. And I would be leery if I didn't mention that timing also offers a priority of steps. Because I do believe with, what was stated with the individual that was just on the phone, you're precluded to that very first statement. The priority can follow, but the priority is that first statement. I'm looking at more of building a ladder base up in a manner that it would be if you, and I used the word gate earlier with you, Jenny, that if there was a situation that wasn't successful, that would cause a challenge, that you would have the ability to deviate. Again, we are a commission not wanting to micromanage the leader. And that is tenuous within that constraint period.
Right, and we also don't know OCHI's timeframe at this point. So do you have any wording for an amendment, a proposed amendment?
I would say all of these things need to become, that first statement would be moved to the bottom. In other words, priority-wise, we need to have more discussion with transition and the agreement, and then an umbrella one. And I don't know, and I'm reticent in saying that they all flow into that end bucket, but to get to this step, to this step, to this step, you're going the other way around in this one.
So
I disagree, and I would like to keep the role, moving that the state library assumes the role of the administrator, and then we negotiate with OCHI. And it's my understanding that that the negotiations are dependent upon that first step.
Right. We don't have the standing to do the second and third sentence unless we've done the first.
Right. So
I know she's
again,
expressed
should this
that.
be two motions?
Well, since it certainly could be, and I don't think it would hurt it. The thing is I think that they're all interdependent. And if you did two of the three, I don't think we'd be successful.
Then if I could amend, and I wouldn't know where to put it if it comes here, or if it's separate, as what Kenny is thinking, I don't know, but I would say the strategic plan, there needs to be a discussion in our motion of more collaboration. And if we just use the word building a 5-year strategic plan within the framework of capacity, I'm just saying things here, can be more simplistically shared, I'm sure, but that the state library and the natural heritage program build a strategic plan together, because this is all about state library. I don't see anything in here at all about the program that is being assumed into the state library at this time.
Right, and so I think this has to predate that, because the state library isn't in charge of the strategic plan until the administration transfers.
So I would add a fourth one in whatever priority that would be, to ensure that there would be a collaborative process in what, and I just used the word strategic plan, it was brought up in the testimony, and I don't know if it's an inclusive within all of these things here, or if it's a separate one that might come differently. But I do believe the Natural Heritage Program and the state library in some collaborative process moving forward might alleviate the fear, might alleviate some conception that they're not going to be brought to the table in a discussion.
Would you be comfortable making that as a second motion after this?
I feel like moving the state library, the state library assuming the role of the heritage program administration, it implies that there's going to be a strategic plan. I don't think the state library runs a program without a strategic plan.
That the transparency of what the commission is doing, again, with some of the tangible or intangibles that are still out there on a question base. And I think that might alleviate that, yes, the state library is continuing, the commission is continuing, leadership is continuing to listen, and will be a partnership moving forward. That, and if I don't know what, to make that into that, again, is it an additional step of the 3 that are here, or is it a unique motion itself, or is it paired with one of these as well, or is it a, after the period in the very first sentence, that it is a conditional phrase that is added onto that very first one, or is it unique to itself?
I think a strategic plan motion is a great idea, and I think it's unique to itself.
Or I
do you
feel
think?
like in the second part at the end, because this transition would include first statement, comma, as well as working with OT and current program staff on a strategic plan.
I'm sorry.
So the second sentence at the very end, it's saying this transition would include, and then having a second statement, comma, and then doing a strategic planning statement in there.
I appreciate that. I also believe those 2 statements are about funding. I believe that they are regarding conversation, but they are also in securing the stability of the program with the opportunity that monies allow. I'm looking at the discussion of people. I'm looking at a group of entities that will be embraced by the state library, and the library staff also embracing them in a strategic, like you had said, how I entered in later when the library was beginning and ending its strategic plan here. So it was it's very beneficial, an understanding of collaborative mode.
Okay, can I offer some a friendly amendment with some wordsmithing maybe?
Mm-hmm.
So the first sentence, I would just add the word statutory. I move that the state library assumes its statutory role of MNTA and HP administrator. Second sentence, this MSL is directed to develop a transition plan that would include negotiating an agreement with OCHI, blah, blah, blah. Okay. MSL
Are you
would,
typing that as someone?
I'm taking notes.
MSL is directed to develop a transition plan.
That would be how you'd start it?
Yeah, the second sentence. MSL would be is directed to develop a transition plan that would include negotiating an agreement with OCHI.
An agreement or agreements. Would you leave or agreements?
I don't know what we need agreement or agreements.
Okay, because an agreement can imply multiple agreements.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right.
Got it?
So this would be, MSL would be directed to develop a transition plan that would include it would include negotiating an agreement with OCHI,
Yes.
allowing blah, blah, blah.
MSL is directed to negotiate a transition plan.
Boy, that was
is
terrible writing.
is directed to develop a transition plan.
That would include, MSL is directed to develop a transition plan that would include negotiating an agreement with OCHI.
Right. And then my final wordsmithing piece is in the last sentence, allowing affiliate campuses to seek and administer grants.
Okay, I have made those changes in my draft. I am now sending this to my friend Marlis.
I don't think it would need to be a part of a motion, but I just want to state that I think a transition plan, under a transition plan, the commission would expect to see reporting on progress. And certainly we would commit to providing that kind of regular reporting on the transition plan and any other kinds of metrics that you would deem helpful.
Yeah, I noted that from comments previously that would be, we should actually it should just be part of the state librarian's report each time, just nothing to report or making great progress or run into a
Yeah,
pothole
we've
here.
hired these staff, universities have received these grants and contracts.
Right, just becomes
This
part
is
of your outline for your standard sort of librarian. That would be very, very helpful. And I assume that we would do that for 3 to 5 years. I mean, during the entire, whatever the transition period was.
There's nothing in here about the Heritage Program people.
This is Ken. Can I propose an additional friendly amendment?
Wait, do we have to vote on this friendly amendment?
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, you're right.
I didn't hear Ken. I didn't.
He wants another friendly amendment, but do we have to vote on this one first? Vote on just the amendment to the motion, not the motion itself?
We do. Is there any further discussion about this first friendly amendment before we entertain Ken's next?
And then we say that we will take this as amended and go forward with Ken's amendment.
No more. All in favor of this amendment, say aye.
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 Oh, you were nay. Okay. Any opposed? Say nay. Okay, friendly amendment passes. And now we'll move on to Ken's suggestion.
Mine is fairly minor, but I would like to have the abbreviation spelled out. I'd like it to say Montana Natural Heritage Program and Office of Commissioner of Higher Education and University of Montana.
Yes.
Trying to put those afterwards in parentheses like memorandum of understanding, but
okay.
I will send actually that piece to Marlis.
Do we have a second for that motion?
Second. I'll second.
Okay. Is there any discussion for that amendment to spell out? the
And
letters?
also have it be included, it should be Montana State Library and then Montana State Library in that second one. There needs to be consistency.
So basically, the motion is to spell out all acronyms,
Is-
right?
Very.
To spell out all of the acronyms of all of the agencies is the motion.
yes.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed?
And in fact, Ken, in my original draft of the motion, I had that as a preamble. Because I totally agree, this is acronymically dense.
So the second friendly amendment passes. Does anybody have any further suggestions for amending this motion?
Well, and I'm still gonna say that there needs to be a collaborative process going forward. If you look at that fourth line down now, and MSL needs to be also spelled out.
Well, it's defined now in the first.
It is
sentence.
defined, okay, I get that, I understand that. But if
So
you
where
look
would
at
you-
that, the noun of it and the verb is directed toward OCHI. It's not directed to the partnership that I'm trying to belay in trepidation with that there is a conversation, a continuing conversation with the Natural Heritage Program and the State Library.
Well,
Isn't this
I
the
don't
noun?
agree that it's directed toward OCHI. It includes OCHI. It includes negotiating an agreement, but it's directed to develop an overall transition plan. So do you have a specific suggestion to make that more
Because you're
clear?
enumerating out OCHI, I would enumerate out the Western Heritage, I don't know what you would say, the existing, a strategic plan for the Natural Heritage Program. Because you are enumerating out that it's OCHI, but I'm saying in the transition plan, it should also include the collaborative going forward. And I'm saying it very messy right now.
Right, so we're struggling.
I
to
know,
how to-
I know,
how
and
to
I don't,
say
and I
this.
know when things get tough, it's very challenging. But I do believe just in the way that you read that third line, the emphasis is on OCHI. The emphasis is on that. It is not on the collaborative effort. I agree a transition plan could be but let's express it more cleanly. And how we say that now.
Well, the other thing though is I would disagree that a strategic plan directive belongs in here. I think that's a separate issue. We're talking about a transition plan. It's
So,
different from a strategic plan for the program itself.
okay, but a transition plan is similar.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I don't want to mince words or synonyms, but I do believe that if we are going to, the purpose of my amendment is to have it be friendly.
Yep.
With the entities that are current in the heritage program now, to belay challenges that we're not going to, the commission's not going to, state librarian's not going to, that the library is not going to. I would like it to be more positive and affirmative, that we are in a collaborative mode.
Right. So what if we just inserted the word collaborative here, right in front of transition? Collaborative transition plan.
I'm still searching to put Montana Natural Heritage Program there somehow. Because you are naming out OG, which is a different entity than I have this program at this point.
But after the first sentence,
We began it
the Heritage Program is part of the state library, so it is no longer as a different entity.
Granted, I get that, but this is a transition. And in this transition and going forward, I know under the leadership of Jenny, the librarian, and the library staff, that there will be continued conversation. But I believe in the motion, it needs to be stated that that is the entity that we're asking for.
And I would like you to give us that statement.
I know, I'm struggling, Erin. And again, in my very first comment on this, should it be a different sentence, or can we just simply put it in, MSL is directed to develop a transition plan in collaboration with, that would include, and the with would be,
So I think we're going back then to a collaborative, that would be the more succinct way to say
you know,
what you're saying.
I have always known that, you know, there is, when you have conversation, you can come to something that means the same. If we want to put collaborative in there, I think I have made enough conversation of wanting things to happen that it will happen. But
sure
I
will.
just, in my motion, I wanted it to be made
I have an
as
idea.
clear as possible. Yes, sir.
So how about we amend that first sentence to say the motion is in reference to the Montana Natural Heritage Program and its partners, the State Library, and then we add the word collaborative here.
I'm pleased with collaborative. If you want to add that into it at that top, at partnership, that even extends out even greater,
Its
which I think is even better.
MTNHP and its partners.
And its partners, okay?
Okay.
And I think in our discussion with this, and I know the good people here at the State Library that will be able to do this, right? Right.
Okay, great, folks.
Okay.
Someone's buying donuts.
So I'll call for a motion on approving Elsie's third friendly amendment.
Do we want to wait until we can see it on the screen?
Well, yes, thank you, Erin. We'll wait till everyone can see it on the screen.
Thank you.
Hurry up, Bruce.
Jeez,
No pressure.
Hush up, please.
3 minutes.
He took typing in 8th grade, okay?
I took typing in 7th grade,
Oh,
and,
there we go.
and it was not successful.
It
It didn't take.
Mm.
I do love spell check. Spell check is my friend.
Mm.
Okay.
You're getting fast at this, Marlis.
I am. I'm just so impressed.
Sometimes discussing words, you know, does lead to that direct action that's going to be taken from the word. So thank you for your patience with me. I appreciate that.
Thank you for all your friendly amendments. This is
Pleasure.
great. This is better than what I brought, so this is good.
Okay, now that everyone can see the results of the third friendly amendment, fourth friendly amendment.
Oh, third, you're right.
Third, okay, thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? Online or in person? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Third friendly amendment passes. Is there are there any further amendments to this motion?
If I could just say, and I know it's going to be speaking to this amendment at this point, you know, as I said, the words will create the action that's going to follow. So if there are other documents that can be created to show us in the pathway and to show the partners in the pathway that the words do matter,
Yeah.
I would be very willing to see those.
And please, if you have expectations for what you would like to see us reporting on, communicating about, please let us know.
Sure.
Kenning, I'm unclear on what, because we just moved to approve the friendly amendment, so do we need a new motion to approve the motion?
We just approved the entire motion.
Okay.
As amended.
Okay. Thank you.
Got lost in the amendment maze.
I did.
Oh, we could put a substitute motion in, which is
No.
way
No.
and then it gets real sticky. Yes, and then we'll table it.
Okay. Motion approved. And we will break for lunch.
Oh,
Did
good.
you have a vote?
I voted.
Oh.
I thought we had a vote.
So do we
I'm
have to
sorry.
vote for the, we have voted for the amendment. not
You have
for-
to vote.
I thought we voted for the motion as amended.
We did.
Okay.
That's my
Okay.
understanding of, that was my
You want me
question.
to change your vote?
No.
I didn't.
Good.
I heard you vote for the amendment. but
We
then I
voted
heard
for
you
the-
vote against it.
You moved to the motion as amended, not the amendment.
Right, but then I didn't hear.
Oh, do you want us to say?
Okay.
I think I voted.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Did I say vote?
You're probably hungry.
That's it.
I can imagine I am.
Okay.
Sorry.
Motion passes. We will break 30 minutes for lunch. Do you guys want to working lunch, or do you want to take a 30-minute break for lunch? Take a break? Okay. We'll reconvene at 1:30. Thank you.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, we have got no action
No
items.
action.
If that's fine, if I can go back to work. Thank you.
Thank you
You're
for
so
your
fun.
important work.
You are so fun. I appreciate it.
Can we reconvene? Hey, are people, are Jamie and Ken online? Do we have any other people?
Well, it still say they're online.
Oh,
I mean, they're still online, whether they're there or not.
Ken, are you there? Jamie, are you there?
Jamie's here.
Yay!
I'm here as well. I just have a fat fingers here. I can't hit unmute.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just keep moving through the agenda. The next thing that we have is the work plan review. We have the commission calendar. And I would like to announce that I appointed Erin to travel to the National Library Legislative Day this year. And thank you for volunteering to do that.
She was just complaining about all the travel.
She hasn't traveled with me.
And then what are we doing with the final minute log?
So the final minute log, Marlis and I were talking about this because we've moved to that consent agenda with the minutes. It
Right.
seemed a little awkward to have the past minutes in the consent agenda. So we thought just having the minutes reflected in the work plan as a reflection of your work made more sense. If you guys have suggestions on where to to link that in future agendas, please do let us know.
Oh, I think this is the appropriate place.
And I do have a couple of updates for the April commission meeting with regard to your work plan. There were the 3 things that the commission had talked about at the start of the fiscal year for commission priorities were, of course, looking at the House Bill 633 legislative study, and we'll have some more updates for you then. Talking about partners and partner mapping and defining what it means to be a partner and have those kinds of partnerships was something that the commission talked about. And a couple of the commissioners went through the community mapping work that the staff did in December. And we have a final prepared map from that work. I thought about bringing it to the commission for this meeting, but I knew it was going to be a long discussion and one that we wanted to have more time and energy to talk about. So my hope and plan is that that can be a significant part of our agenda at your April meeting. I think it's important for the commission to weigh in on what we mean by partnerships, how we then identify those partners, and how we would prioritize partnerships to align with the impact of the work that we're wanting to see. I think that's what you'll see reflected in the community partner map that the staff developed. But I think it'll be great to have the commission either develop one of their own or weigh in on the one that the staff developed.
That would be, I think that would be really good information to start getting to more librarians, because that's part of the proposed standards is partnerships.
Yeah.
So if they don't understand what partnerships are or what they should look like.
That's a good point. Sort of understanding that, modeling that behavior in our own work, and then also identifying sort of state level partners that might have local equivalents that we can start building those relationships around and bridges to. So like I said, I hope that will be a significant part of our April commission meeting. And I think having it at MLA would be a great opportunity as well. The other thing that we're planning for the April commission meeting that pertains to another one of your work plan objectives is looking at broadband. And we have the report from the Gigabit Toolkit. Simmons College has been doing their analysis, and we'll have that analysis for the commission at the April meeting as well. We're trying to arrange at this point to have the staff from Simmons who did the analysis be at your meeting. They think that they can, they have some grant funds to come in person. If not, we'll have them online, but we're hoping that they can join us in person to talk to us about opportunities forward from that kind of work. So I'm really excited about those 2 things at your April meeting. And then we're going to have a report from the cohort that was at last summer's Leadership Institute, sharing updates with all of you at MLA. That's neat.
We have some gaps in commitments for the spring Federation meetings.
I can show up for the Pathfinder meeting on the 14th of May.
I'd like to go to the Broad Valley since the White Sulphur library is in that.
Oh, I'm going to that one too.
Okay, that'll be great. Then you can sit by me and keep me quiet.
Okay.
So what are you?
Good luck.
So it looks like we're missing Golden Plains.
Golden Plains doesn't have a meeting time yet.
Did I not update the calendar?
Do they not?
I think we do on, let's see, April 16th. Is that right, Tracy? Golden Plains is on April 16th.
So
And
going back to Sagebrush, yeah.
So I would actually like to go to Sagebrush.
Okay.
I've actually never been in Miles City.
Oh, great.
And I've never been a part of the Federation over there, so that's exciting.
South Central. I don't know when theirs is.
South Central, is the 14th. We have a lot of overlapping federation meetings.
I see.
this
Oh, I
spring.
see. So that overlaps with Sagebrush.
Sagebrush is the 13th. Is going to be on the Friday this year.
Oh, okay.
And then South Central is going to be on the Saturday.
Where is it this time?
Of March.
Laurel. It's in
Laurel.
Yeah.
I can go to that if you need me to.
Okay. And all of the spring meetings are in person, right?
Yeah, they are
Okay.
all in person. Yeah.
So Broad Valleys is covered. Golden Plains.
Aaron, I don't know if you would have a chance to come to Laurel, meet me in Laurel on your way back
The
from
next
Miles
day?
City the next day.
Yeah, maybe that would be.
Ooh.
Shall all three of us show up?
Well, Jamie, if you're going to be at Broad Valleys, that would conflict.
No.
No, Broad Valleys moved earlier.
Oh, they did.
They are. I think so.
They're on the 13th and the 14th is South Central, right?
We have Sagebrush, South Central, and Broad Valleys, unless they changed it, are all the same weekend.
It's like Sagebrush and Broad Valleys are on the 13th and South Central is on the 14th.
But Broad Valleys is a 2-day.
Broad Valleys is 2 days. Yeah. And overnight.
Doesn't allow me to.
Wow.
The 13th and the 14th. Yeah. So Jamie, they do lots of training on the 13th, and they do more training on the 14th. But their business meeting is on the 14th.
Okay. South Central.
Broad Valleys.
Okay.
And that's in.
And then South. So, what about South Central's time frame? Are they just 1 day?
Yes.
And that's on the 13th.
South Central's on the 14th.
Okay.
And Tracy will correct me if something's changed.
Okay. Can we have you as being tentative for Golden Plains on the 26th?
I'm just trying to find that one here.
I'm way wrong.
I think
Never mind.
Golden Plains is now on the 16th of April.
I don't have it on
Where
my
is it?
calendar.
And where's that one?
In Wolf Point.
Wolf Point?
Yeah, and you weren't tentative. Sorry. You were tentative for their last meeting.
Yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant just because I've got an ending physical therapy early that month, but that long of a drive is tough. Until, I'm kind of thinking, June, July is when I'm feeling I can fly again and kind of sit in the car for longer periods. Because I haven't gone through it last year. I know how hard it is to do that. And I don't think there are any in June or July, unfortunately.
No, and we actually have you down for Tamarack for May 15th, but it sounds like that's not going to work out.
Well, that's a little different because I've gone to that every year, and that's a hour-and-a-half drive, which it's not the driving part; it's the sitting for that long.
Yeah.
So I think that one's is doable. I might not go for both days this time, and that's a horrible building for access, but I made it work last time.
Well, we'll keep you down for that, and just let us know if that changes.
Yep.
So what was the one that's in Wolf Point?
The Golden Plains Federation on April 16th.
Okay, I couldn't do that and South Central at the same time though, could I? I mean, one's in Laurel and one's in Wolf Point.
One is in March and one is in April. The South Central's in March. It's the same day as the Saturday of the Broad Valleys retreat.
Okay. March what?
14th.
Okay. And April 16th is Golden Plains?
Yes.
Okay. I will do my best.
I can coordinate with you, Jamie, and if you're available, I could even pick you up. I'm going to that meeting.
The Golden Plains?
Yeah.
I just got a brand new pickup. How about you ride with me?
We could negotiate that.
Okay.
Who drives?
Oh, I drive. I drive. Yeah, I have control issues.
So does that leave, which one do we have no volunteer for from the commission?
So did
Pathfinder?
you say Pathfinder changed the date?
I'm not sure what's on your calendar.
We have May.
Is that- there's one in October.
They had moved it, and so I wasn't sure if we had that updated date.
I do
There's one on-
Pathfinders.
Okay.
I think
When's Pathfinder?
Pathfinder is
May
Fort
14th.
Benton.
May 14th, and I'm happy not to do it if you want to do it. But
I'd love to. I'd love to. I can visit friends there.
Okay,
Good.
then I'll just take myself off that date.
And I can stay at the fancy hotel and eat well.
Well, that was sort of my plan too.
Is there one that we don't have?
Let's see. I just want to confirm what I have. I have Erin going to Sagebrush and potentially going to South Central the next day. We have Anne and Jamie at the Broad Valleys Retreat in Butte. And then potentially Jamie going to Golden Plains in April with me and to the Pathfinder Federation. And then Ken going to the Tamarack Federation.
Have we covered them all?
I think that's all of
That's
them.
it.
Then I'll drop out of the one with Ann because I'll have seen a lot of Montana by then.
Okay.
So I've got Golden Plains, Pathfinder, and the one in Fort Benton.
It's Pathfinder.
Yeah, that's Pathfinder.
Okay. Okay.
I went and looked at my Outlook calendar, which is much more reliable. Pathfinder did move to May 7th.
Okay.
So
Did you hear that, Jamie? The one in Fort Benton moved to May 7th.
And will you be back?
Okay.
Will you be back from DC?
That's cutting it close.
That
Just
back. Probably that.
Maybe.
Is that when the library meeting is?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know what, I could go to that one.
Which one, the Pathfinder?
Yeah. If you don't want to go.
I'm not going. Kara's going to staff
Who's coming back from Washington?
me and Aaron.
Okay,
So-
who's going to Pathfinder?
Jamie was.
I am.
Jamie and
Jamie.
Kara.
So somehow I sort of skated free when Jamie so rudely took my Pathfinder thing. So if someone can't make it, then I could be the pitch hitter.
Okay.
You'd have to ride with me.
I'd be pleased. But no, I'll be the stand-in in case someone is
Okay.
ill or can't otherwise make it.
We'll send an email out after this meeting, just
Yeah.
confirming everyone's attendance and the dates, so you all have them.
Do we
Perfect.
Do we want to send somebody to this? Or is that just on?
I think yes, we do have.
I'm sorry?
money.
Just don't touch your steering
Just
wheel.
Ken does.
I would not dream of it.
Ken, I know you may not be able to travel. Were you going to go to the Big Sky GeoCon this year?
It's in Missoula.
Oh,
Yeah, it's in Missoula.
oh, I
so
see
yes,
that.
I'm gonna be there.
Okay, great.
When is that?
That is April 7th.
It's the week right after the Library Association conference. One year they had both the
They did have
GIS
it
and
together.
the Library Association conference together, and it was,
Yeah.
for me, it was fantastic. I don't know how staff felt, but
We have a great next gen 911 track set up for that. So looking forward to it.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you for going to that. I think that's all that we have that we need to pin down right now. Okay. So the next item is the annual bylaw review. And I specifically had asked for this. I mean, I think that we always do it at this meeting, but I see a problem with the bylaws, and you can all scan for your own things that you would like to change too, but I'm looking for the election cycle, and at the last, this is from the bylaw, at the last meeting of the fiscal year, which is normally in June, candidates shall self-nominate themselves for office or be nominated by other commissioners. Commissioners accept and decline nominations. And then I'm summarizing, you say why you want to be an officer. And then everyone thinks about it. And then this is from the bylaws. At the first regular meeting of the fiscal year, which is normally held in August, the chairperson and vice person shall be elected annually from the slate of prospective officers. So now we're declaring intentions in June and we're voting in August. So my term is up. Our website says June 30th. I think it's June 1st, but I'm okay with June 30th. Erin, yours is up on June 1st. We started at the same time. We got reappointed at the same time. And you're finished on June 1st and I'm finished on June 30th. So something happened. Either way, so that would leave me as chairing the commission meeting. The last commission meeting would be in August that I would chair. But my appointment will be expired.
So would that go to the vice chair to run the meeting in August?
Yeah, that might be how we do it. That's it.
So your appointment to the commission expires, or your chair?
My entire appointment. Yeah, so the chair, I don't, and I think this normally isn't a problem because maybe people just don't tend to be chair on their final year, or that hasn't happened in recent memory. So anyway, the way our schedule lines up doesn't line up with appointments.
So who is vice chair?
Ken.
I am.
And Ken, when does your term expire?
April of 2021, next year.
Yeah. So
and I'm willing to be the chair for that August meeting. I have some concerns that I've expressed to Jenny and others about being the chair as we head into the future, simply because of I work with Next Gen 911 projects, and I don't want to create any, even apparent conflict of interest, which I'm afraid, I'm just concerned about that. I don't think that would be a problem in August, but it would be if it continued much longer than that.
So I do think that practice has been that you just keep coming and serving on the commission until somebody has replaced you. And I don't
that works well.
That's the direction that we've gotten from the governor's office.
Yeah, and so if the appointment wasn't replaced by that time, then it would be fine with me to attend, but I think it would be inappropriate of me to chair if my term is technically expired. What do you guys think?
It seems to me that Ken, as vice chair, doesn't become chair for that meeting. He leads the meeting as vice chair. So that kind of takes the heat away from him. He runs the meeting, and then presumably at that point we'd have new officers, and Bob's your uncle. And if the governor's office reappointed you before that August meeting,
and I'm not up for reappointment, yeah.
Then then that would take care of itself as well. So I don't see any trouble with the bylaws in regards to this. I think that we can navigate without violating bylaws, I think.
Okay.
And so, just that being said, if no one is appointed to replace me by the June 12th meeting, I'm perfectly fine with committing to that, but I just don't think I can commit any further than
And also, we don't know if we're June 1st or June 30th. And so I'm not terribly concerned about that because we're just coming. But it might be a matter that the commission would want to settle.
We'll go back and look at the appointment letters and see if they have a specific date. That might just be a data entry error in the database too. So.
Or we could have been appointed at different times.
Yeah, we'll
I
double
think
check.
the actual issue was we could have someone come up that they hadn't gotten reappointed. It might even been Pete possibly that we had, this
Kenning
was the
was a
first,
problem.
and he actually, and that was when his time was up, but he hadn't had a reappointment yet. And the website, the way our new system has it, erased all of his data. He wasn't even out there.
Oh no.
So if Aaron is saying the first and you're saying the 30th, Aaron needs to change because then if the third comes along, we haven't had an appointment, you won't be out there. So that's why it's not, it's just too high for everyone.
I can call that reputation management.
So I don't think there needs to be any change to the bylaws because we've got the fail-safe with the vice
With
chair.
the vice. Okay, that sounds good.
That'd be something to keep in mind in the future when we were electing chairs and vice chairs to make sure that both of their terms did not run out in the same year.
Yeah.
Good point.
Does that make sense to you, Ken? Are you comfortable with that?
Yes, again, as long as it doesn't extend much beyond August.
You're just running the meeting. You're vice chair. You're just running the meeting.
Oh, vice chair. Yeah, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Although I need some severe coaching to stand up to the last.
I have a cheat sheet. I do. Does anybody else see anything with the bylaw review of either the bylaws or the stated duties of the commission board chair and the commissioners?
One thing that I think the commission might want to consider is not necessarily an amendment to the bylaws, but an addition to the bylaws. Some libraries have a document called the Rules of Conduct and Procedures for the Boards of Trustee meetings. And that's in response to Montana's open meeting laws that call for boards to clearly articulate what the public participation process looks like. And working with me and our staff very clearly wanted to articulate what the public comment process would be. And so that language right now is included in the header of all of your agendas. And I think that's sufficient, but I think we could take a step of having a document that spells out for the public what our regular meetings are, what our special meetings are, and in what circumstances we might have special meetings like work sessions, the circumstances that might surround an emergency meeting. The rules of conduct essentially lay out for any member of the public what level of participation they can and should expect from our meetings.
That might have been helpful today.
And at the last, it would have been helpful several times this year. And I do think it's legitimately confusing to people because a lot of us participate in public comment in various venues, and each board has their own policies. So sometimes it's just genuinely confusing as a member of the public how and when you go about speaking.
Oh, and we do operate fairly informally, which I personally find lovely, but it can't violate the overall process. That's not lovely.
Yeah, and as long as the process isn't in violation of open meeting laws, the commission has that discretion to set that process, but there is an expectation that we clearly articulate to the public then what that process is, so they know.
I think that's a splendid idea.
So what I would propose is staff would bring a draft of that kind of document for your review in April.
Sounds good.
Does that mean I have to start behaving?
No.
Good.
one more calendar item.
Oh, go ahead.
Well,
Sorry,
a
I
few
skipped
more calendar items. So our next meeting will be April 1st at MLA, and there was a suggestion that the commission might have dinner. Bruce is coming the day of, so for everyone to attend, are you all planning to stay at least through the conversations with the commission next day so we could have dinner that Wednesday night?
Mhm.
I just want to make sure so I notice it on the agenda.
Mhm.
And then our
Yes.
June meeting, which was not today in Great Falls, thankfully. June meeting is going to be at the Ursuline Center in Great Falls, held in conjunction with the Directors Institute. So we're planning that so you have a chance to interact with the library directors that will be also in Great Falls for that institute.
How do you spell it, Ursuline?
URSULINE, like the Ursuline sisters.
Is that over somewhere near the campus?
It's near the Paris Gibson,
Paris Gibson, okay.
kind of downtown. So that's our June meeting.
Is that where we're staying?
I don't know that we've arranged hotel accommodations yet.
I've stayed there. It was like $12 because there's none rooms.
Yeah. That sounds lovely.
I did the MLA retreat there when MLA was broke.
Well,
But it's
yeah,
cute.
yeah.
And there's gargoyles on the roof.
I know we have a bunch of people staying there, so we'll find out if they might have accommodation for us or not.
There's also a looking tub.
Yeah.
There's always the sip and dip.
That's just it, Jamie. You bet. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So that's our June, and then our October meeting will be back in Missoula at the brand new Missoula Public Library that will be open by then. So some things to think about for your agenda.
Okay, does anybody have any other calendar items or bylaw? Anything they would like to revisit with the bylaws?
You will put all of these dates. I know that they're sort of published, but you'll kind of put that in the minutes so that we can look back and make sure we're on the right page.
You bet.
Of what you just talked about, Jenny?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. You get as old and crippled as I am, you have a short memory.
All right, do we have any public comment on any matter not contained in this agenda and that is within the jurisdiction of the State Library Commission?
Can I just make a brief announcement?
Yes, please.
This will be announced, I think, at the National Emergency Member Association, NENA, meeting this year, but Montana formed a chapter of NENA, and that was approved by their board last week. So NENA is the group that, since founded in 1982, it's an NGO that sets the standards for 911, not just next generation 911, but all of 911 for many years. And it's industry, local government, state and federal government representatives. So that's exciting. And Safira Olson from way up in Sheridan County is the president. And Scott O'Connell, the police department in Helena, runs their IT for the 911 center, is the vice president. I'm the secretary treasurer. So that'll be announced sometime in Montana as well. It's not a secret or anything, but it's so it's a new chapter of that group, and I think they don't add them too often, so it's kind of exciting to the NENA folks.
Thanks, Ken.
Congratulations.
Yeah, very good.
And I don't know about the Montana chapter, but just so all of you know, Michael Fashaway is a NENA member, the larger organization. It is a very important organization to a lot of folks.
Thank you. Is there any other business or announcements? Okay. Hearing none, I would like to thank all of the commissioners and Jenny for the hard work, and the staff for the hard work leading up to this meeting today. I appreciate everybody's careful consideration and just the amount of time that we've spent as of late and attending special meetings and workforces and all that. So thank you very much, and the meeting's adjourned.
Thank you for your good.
Thank you for being a good leader, Anne.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks.
You know you're not using your gavel if I go away.
I know. I have an aversion.
I can't imagine what it'd be like to hit that right next